Hello everyone, I am the storyteller today who will take you on a mysterious journey. There are stories that cannot be explained, but can only be felt. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night with the feeling that something is looking at you, even though there is only darkness around? If you feel that fear right now, don't leave. Join me in these strange and true horror stories, told in the sound of rain, and then you will understand that there are things that cannot be explained. Like with reason. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard against my ribs that I thought it might burst out of my chest. This feeling isn't the first time I've experienced it, but this time, there's something special. In the darkness, I knew something was wrong. The air was stuffy and heavy, as if the walls had closed in at night, enveloping me, making it impossible to breathe. Bitter taste in the mouth, fishy taste of panic. I felt a movement near the foot of the bed. A light bulb flashed, but when I tried to concentrate, it immediately disappeared. And I realized with a shudder that nothing in my life had ever been so terrifying. Since childhood, I have always felt like I am sensitive to things that others cannot see. In empty hallways, I sometimes see a figure running around a corner, but when I look back, there's no one there. Tiny sounds like footsteps or breathing, things that can't be explained, always wake me up in the middle of the night. My mom used to say I should see a therapist for my insomnia, but I just thought it was my overactive imagination. And so I live with those feelings, considering them a part of life. But when I moved into my new apartment, everything changed. With its low rent and convenient location, I chose this apartment. The landlord said it was an old architectural gem, even though there were many neglected parts. But there was a certain strange charm about the peeling walls and rickety floors that made me feel like I was entering another era. However, the first night I was here, I felt a strange silence after dark. It wasn't normal silence, but something heavy, covering the entire apartment, to the point I couldn't stand it. The lights in the apartment flickered whenever I walked around at night, as if they were reacting to my restlessness. Occasionally, I thought I heard a muffled voice from the living room, soft and agitated, but there was no one there. My furniture shook on its own, as if the weight of an invisible figure had shifted. These things are not big, not worth mentioning, but enough to make me shiver. One evening, while I was trying to do something to distract myself from my worries, I suddenly felt a movement in the corner of my peripheral vision. A dark shadow seemed to protrude from behind the open door leading into the hallway. My throat was dry when I turned around. But the door only revealed the dim hallway behind. I can feel that presence, and I can't explain why. Why does it only appear in the darkness? Is it just my imagination, or is it a truth I don't want to face? Actually, I think these strange phenomena are more than just what I see. They could be reflections from the depths of my mind. The worries and fears that I cannot express are invisible but clearly present in every step, every fleeting shadow. We are, sometimes, too sensitive to our surroundings and create unexplainable feelings for ourselves. So, what is that black shadow? A part of me, or something from another world? These phenomena are inexplicable, but they leave an invisible feeling that I cannot dispel. Perhaps we will never be able to explain everything, but one thing I am sure of is, each of these experiences helps me understand more about myself and the world around me. We may never have a clear answer, but I hope today's story will make you reflect and understand that sometimes, darkness isn't something out there, but in our own minds. The darkness in life, although scary, also helps us grow. Sometimes, to free ourselves, we need to face the fears in our hearts. Always remember, after every rain, there will be sunshine. Surely you've heard the wind whistling through the window, strange footsteps in the dark, or the feeling of someone standing right next to you that you can't see. In today's story, I will tell you about an experience that I cannot explain, a story full of fear, horror that I went through myself. The first day I lived in my old apartment, I felt something unusual. That's right, you can't understand until you face it yourself. Feeling that there is a presence near me, sometimes I can hear strange noises, like the ancient radiator making noise every night, or the darkness under the dim light seems to be moving. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But it seems like every step, every little movement in the room makes me more worried. There's definitely something just there. The feeling of watching, of an invisible presence, did not leave me. Every hum of the ancient radiator startled me. Every change in the darkness, no matter how small, under the weak light, made my palms sweaty. That feeling increases every night. I found myself unable to stop fighting the urge to run outside, just to escape the oppressive silence of that room. I decided to confide in a close friend, and as if asking for help. I told her that I felt a presence that was making me increasingly afraid. My friend seemed worried, and advised me to try burning sage or keeping a small talisman. I have tried both. The acrid smoke of the sage made my eyes water, but I felt relief, only temporarily. The next day, that feeling came back, stronger. The amulet I wore, a small obsidian stone, only seemed to add to my anxiety. I kept fiddling with that stone in my pocket, as if it could protect me. But no matter how much I prayed or visualized a bright light filling the room, the feeling of being watched remained like a ghost that never left me. One night, I woke up in the oppressive silence. My chest felt tight, and the air in the room was so thick, it was like I could feel my own fear. And then, I felt a presence right next to me. A terrible weight pressed against the edge of the mattress. The hair on my arms stood up, my heart pounded so hard I couldn't move. I strained my ears, searching for any breath other than my own. And then I heard a very faint sound. One breath, so close, but when I looked back, there was no one. Everything remains only silence. However, I could have sworn that there was a figure standing next to me. Something tall, hidden in the shadows, as if watching me. At last, as the morning light began to appear, I felt some comfort. However, everything around me looked sinister. Sunlight poured in through the window, but why was it darker than usual? My reflection in the mirror seemed cloudy, my eyes were empty, as if I hadn't slept all night. I can't understand. There's definitely something in this room, I can feel it. Sometimes I wonder, is this fear from inside my mind? Anxiety, inexplicable feelings of an invisible presence were covering my space. Perhaps, what I felt was not real, but that feeling was very vivid, very clear. I tried to befriend it, but it seemed like it didn't want to let me go. Was the darkness in the room an illusion created by my fear, or was there actually a presence in this darkness? I don't have the answers, but these experiences will stay with me forever. The shadows can never leave me, and I feel like I'm always in a race with my own fears. That evening, I looked at the faint lines of the wallpaper. The strange twisted shapes made me feel like I was seeing distorted faces, deformed images. I told myself it was just my nerves, maybe it was the sleepless nights, but the feeling just wouldn't go away. I drank half a cup of coffee, tried to steady my hands, and decided to learn about the building's history. Perhaps knowing about it will help me relieve some of this feeling of obsession. I hope to at least find a practical reason to explain this strange feeling. I went to the local library, which had old newspapers and property records from many years ago. I looked through them, looking for any signs that might explain my strange feelings. But there were only changes in ownership, complaints about structural problems, nothing but dry and brittle documents. Nothing can explain the low rent other than the fact that this building needs renovation. However, I cannot escape the feeling that there is something hidden in these documents. These lines, they are more than just mundane information. They are shells covering something deeper, something I cannot yet understand. As I read through the newspapers, I caught a glimpse of an image out of the corner of my eye. A janitor, an old man sorting files, stood right next to me. But when I turned around to get a better look, he was no longer there. Just empty space, like he never existed. My heart was pounding. Was my paranoia following me outside the apartment? Everything seems to have no explanation. Why do such images appear? Why does it feel like someone is looking at me? Because I felt desperate, I decided to try everything. I returned home with a pile of books on supernatural folklore and spiritual cleansing. Even though I've never been particularly religious, this feeling really drove me to try anything that might solve the problem. I flipped through the book's chapters on vanishing rituals, wards, and protective symbols. And in that moment, I felt a faint glimmer of hope. But all my efforts only seemed to make things worse. I lit white candles in a circle, sprinkled salt along the threshold, recited half-remembered incantations, but it all only added to the oppressive atmosphere. Every time the candle flickered, the darkness lengthened and covered the room, as if they wanted to engulf everything. The shadows lengthened, spreading across the floor like predatory tree branches, as if they were watching me. I felt a presence, an invisible force surrounding me. And I feel like I can't run away from it. The feeling of being surrounded, trapped in my own room, made me unable to do anything but wait. Every time I tried to move, every step felt like something was pulling me back. Flickering candles are no longer a comfort. Instead, they only highlight the ghostly shapes, the shadows flickering in the air. And I can't understand why, but I feel like there's no way out. Sometimes, the fears we experience are not what appears on the outside, but are a reflection of our own mind. Have you ever felt like you are surrounded by invisible things that can only be felt, but cannot be explained? My throat tightens every time the apartment goes silent, and suddenly there's a hiss or groan coming from somewhere. At night, I suddenly woke up, feeling like something whispered my name in the darkness. The words were indecipherable, but I clearly felt that their intent was threatening, as if there was a warning that I had crossed the line, had done something wrong. After a particularly miserable evening, when I felt a hand, or maybe a claw, cling to my shoulder as I dozed off, I couldn't take it anymore. That feeling is not a dream or a hallucination. It's real. And that's when I decided to seek professional help. But not from a psychiatrist, but from someone who claims to be an expert on the paranormal. Through an acquaintance, I was contacted by a person who claimed to have special abilities, a medium. She arranged to meet me at a small coffee shop near where I live. When I met her, her eyes glanced at me with strange sympathy, as if she understood everything without me needing to say more. She started asking about my past experiences, about the emotions I was going through. She said that highly sensitive people, like me, easily attract energies that feed fear. She advised me to try meditation and grounding exercises, encouraging me to face any presences I felt, instead of running away from them. That advice made me feel both hopeful and worried. Is this a realistic solution, or am I just lost in my own superstition? Returning to my apartment, I forced myself to walk down the hallway in complete darkness. With each shaky step, my heart pounded against my chest like a warning drum. I tried to desensitize myself to this fear. Every breath I took was like inhaling cold pieces of ice. At the end of the hallway, a crooked mirror reflected my figure in the dim light from a distant street lamp. As I inched closer, the reflection began to ripple in my peripheral vision, as if the glass was warping. I thought I saw another figure behind me, incredibly tall and featureless, but when I turned around, the hallway was empty. My stomach turned as I realized that my mind or my eyes might be betraying me. Had I actually seen someone, or was it just a product of fatigue and stress? Every moment, I don't know whether I am facing the truth or just an illusion created by my own mind. In the following days, I tried everything to regain a sense of normalcy. I rearranged the furniture in the apartment, hoping that a new layout would break these dark illusions. But no matter how hard we try, it feels like something always exists in the darkness. It's not just outside, but inside my own mind, making it impossible for me to escape. Was what I experienced the product of an overwrought imagination, or was there truly an invisible presence watching me, always lurking in the shadows? And if I can face it, can I truly free myself from this obsession? Or will I have to live with it forever? Sometimes, our fears are not something outside of us. They can be invisible images and feelings that come from deep within our minds. Have you ever felt like you were living in an illusion, unable to distinguish what was real and what was fake. I tried to fill the space with bright lights, creating a fortress of light, but darkness kept creeping in, clinging tightly to the corners of the apartment. My efforts to ignore it only increased the feeling crawling under my skin, the feeling like someone was watching me. Sometimes, I feel a cold wind passing by me, even though there are no open windows or ventilation in the room. Other times, the entire apartment felt stuffy and hot, sweat trickling down my forehead even though the thermostat still recorded a normal temperature. My mood fluctuates. Sometimes I think I can fight this presence, reclaim my space. But right after that, I was overwhelmed with fear and thought about leaving the apartment, not daring to face what was happening. The worst thing was the nagging feeling that something was sucking at my most sinister thoughts, as if it were eating away at the fears, the dark things in my mind. I cannot escape them. Every time I fell into despairing thoughts about the future, about the loneliness that haunted me late at night, or regretting past decisions, the apartment walls seemed to tighten, as if the building itself was resonating with my negativity. Suddenly I remembered the medium's warning about entities that thrive on high emotional energy, especially fear. That realization gave me chills. Perhaps my trauma has drawn something sinister from this darkness. I redoubled my efforts to escape its control. As the medium advised, I tried to draw protective symbols around the windows and doors. I told myself that it was the only way to protect myself from this intrusion. As I finished the last one, I heard a creaking sound behind me, like nails dragging across a hardwood floor. I turned around, adrenaline pumping through my veins, but I couldn't see anything. The tension was so thick that it almost weighed down my body, and a nauseating panic rose in my gut. At that moment, I felt certainty wash over me. No matter how many words I try to say, this presence cannot make me give up. I decided to fight. But then, one night when I couldn't sleep, I lay awake, looking at the shadows on the wall, my breathing shallow. Every inhale and exhale is a reminder of my accelerating heart rate. Suddenly, the lamp wobbled, each string of lights flickering. The shadows on the wall widened, their shapes twisting into something inexplicable. My whole body tensed as I felt the mattress sink near my ankles. It happened again. This time, I forced myself to raise my head and look. A vague shape, dark but unmistakable, lay at the edge of the bed. My stomach churned. That shadow, it's not an illusion. I could feel its presence, something invisible but present more clearly than ever in the darkness. I couldn't move, as if my body was frozen, and I could only wait, feeling like something terrible was approaching. Will I have to live with it forever? This presence, this darkness, never leaves me. It felt like this apartment had become a part of my mind, a part of my inexplicable fear. I don't know if what I'm experiencing is real or just an illusion. And you, have you ever felt like you were being watched by something invisible? Something that can't be seen, but can be felt? Sometimes, the shadows in life are not just what we see, but what we feel in our minds. Do you dare to face it? My pulse was pounding in my ears, the pounding was so loud I thought they were about to explode. Dripping sweat covered my skin as I tried to steady my breathing, but it kept coming up short, making me feel even more suffocated. Although I could not see any facial features of this entity, I could feel its close surveillance, an undeniable presence. I remembered the medium's words, "Let's face it." And with all the courage I had, I sat up. My body trembled violently, my voice shaking with fear as I tried to speak. But my throat refused to form coherent words. My mind was filled with firm requests, "Leave me alone. This is my space." But that figure didn't disappear, but came closer, as if mocking me. Everything feels distorted, space seems deformed. Time seemed to slow down, my vision blurred. I couldn't believe what was happening, my mind was reeling, on the brink of hysteria. And then, immediately, the light in the room returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. The weight lifted from the bed, and the figure vanished into the surrounding darkness, leaving behind an oppressive silence. Every muscle in my body went limp, and I fell back onto the pillow, gasping for air. I understand that I will never truly escape this thing if I just hide behind wards and rituals. Something changed within me. The next day, I made a decision. I have to leave. I hastily stuffed my things into the box, trying not to glance at the corners of the room, where the darkness was still lurking. My heart pounded at the thought of what might be lurking behind me, but I refused to succumb to panic. Every time the floorboards creak or a shadow flickers, I force myself to calm down. My instincts told me that running away might be the only way to preserve my sanity. But no matter how much I try to leave, I know this presence can follow me wherever I go. But I can't let fear control me. I have to escape this vicious circle. I have to break this cycle. When I finally dragged my last box out into the hallway, the oppressive silence filled in with renewed vigor. It was like a warning, as if the apartment itself was trying to hold back one last time. My chest tightened, sweat flowed down my back, I almost lost all courage. With trembling hands, I locked the door behind me, feeling a surge of fear in my heart. I took one last glance at the peeling wallpaper, half expecting to see the shape of my nightmare. And then, I turned and walked away. I don't know if I can really escape it, but I'm sure of one thing: this is the last time I stand in this room. There's nothing but a shadow. Outside, the sky was gray and the drizzle made the street shiny. The humid air felt like a blessing compared to the suffocating weight inside me. My heart rate was still unstable, my mouth was dry and adrenaline was still pumping through my body. However, for the first time in weeks, I could breathe without feeling something hovering just out of my vision. I told myself I made the right choice. Leaving was the only reasonable decision. But in the back of my mind, a nagging thought lingered in my head, like a ghost that couldn't be exorcised: it may not end. Whatever feeds my fears can still bind my soul. No matter how far I run, it can still find a way to reappear in the corners of my life. I looked up at the rows of windows, each reflecting the gloomy sky, my own reflection wavering in the glass. Deep inside, I felt that heaviness, that invisible presence that invaded my every moment. Even if the apartment is behind me, the memory of that silhouette will forever be etched into my consciousness. As I turned away, pulling my coat tighter against the drizzle, I felt a chill run down my spine, a feeling that made me wonder if, despite my best efforts, I could ever truly leave this nightmare behind. And in that final chilling moment, I understood that some doors, once opened, can never be completely closed. I remember that first night as if it were seared into my mind, vivid and unyielding. The atmosphere in the old house seemed stuffy and tense, as if something invisible was lurking behind every door. It is a place where people feel compelled to whisper, even when no one is around. The floorboards creaked in silence, and the walls themselves felt all too close, as if they were alive, listening, breathing, waiting. I arrived with an uneasy feeling rising to the base of my skull. It was just an old rented house that my colleague had found, but from the moment I stepped inside, I had the uneasy feeling that we were trespassing on something. We didn't know it at the time, but a single discovery in the attic would shatter our sense of security and send us into a spiral of fear. When I agreed to help my colleague sort through the boxes in the musty attic, I just thought we'd find old newspapers or maybe some forgotten mementos. But as soon as we got to the attic, the atmosphere changed. The feeling of stuffiness and tension spread throughout the space. The darkness seemed thicker, heavier, enveloping us. The boxes were stacked randomly, and every time I touched one, I felt like someone was watching me, waiting for something to happen. In the end, I left there, but the feeling of presence never left me. No matter how far I ran, the darkness followed me, and I knew that once that door opened, it would never completely close. But can I really escape it, or am I simply running away forever? The place smelled like damp cardboard, the air was stuffy, and cobwebs hung from the rafters like tattered curtains. We rummaged through piles of yellowed books, broken lamps, and moth-eaten blankets. Occasionally, we would exchange whispered comments that the place felt weird, not the fun kind of weird, but the creepy weird, as if something wasn't right. Finally, we discovered a small wooden chest near the back wall, almost hidden under a torn cloth. Inside was a sign unlike anything I had ever seen before. It emerged a swirl of dark spots and confusing symbols. I thought it might be a homemade talking board, or some kind of ancient game. My colleague muttered in an annoyed voice that we should take it downstairs and, just out of curiosity, see what would happen if we tinker with it. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Even though it didn't feel right, I was still driven by curiosity. Downstairs, the living room is equally dreary, lit by a single floor lamp, providing enough light for reading. I put the board on the coffee table, expecting nothing more than a silly distraction, but then a strange feeling arose. We made half-hearted attempts to summon whatever might be beyond our vision, giggling nervously at our own melodramatic behavior. We don't really believe that something will happen. However, the tension in our voices revealed we were a little more scared than we wanted to admit. My heartbeat quickened as we gently placed our hands on a makeshift pointer. That's absurd, we think. But everything changed when there was the first sound. A slight thumping sound came from under the floorboards, as if someone was walking around in the basement with shoes that were too big for their feet. That sound made me stiffen. Both my colleague and I looked at each other, the tension in the air immediately increased. We didn't dare move, didn't dare speak, just waited, as if something was going to happen next. The pounding was constant, one after another, like invisible footsteps. I could feel the coldness spreading throughout my body. It felt like the space around me was tightening. My eyes couldn't leave the board in front of me, but even as I looked at it, I knew that something was moving, not on the ground, but in the darkness behind us. It felt like an invisible eye was watching us from the darkness, never stopping looking, never blinking. We stood still, not daring to move. Each time the sound rang out, my heart beat faster, to the point where I was afraid it would burst. The air seemed to stagnate, the room became so quiet that I could hear every breath I took. But then, the silence was broken again, and once again, the banging sounded again, this time clearer and closer. We can't stand it anymore. Our eyes looked toward the door, where the darkness seemed to thicken. I don't know if it was our imagination or not, but I clearly felt that something from the basement was gradually approaching, as if coming to welcome us. And I can't leave. This feeling, the feeling of being chased, makes me unable to calm down anymore. Was it just a joke, or were we really unleashed on something we had no control over? Is it an ancient game, or is there really some force waiting to come out of the shadows and take us over? And if we opened the door, can we close it again? I stiffened, my fingers became sticky, I couldn't move. My colleague tried to brush it off, but his expression revealed a hint of wariness. Then came the slow dragging sound of something heavy rubbing on the floor below us. My scalp tightened, fear rushed back. We set the sign aside, believing we had messed something up, touched something that no one should touch. Suddenly, a sharp wrapped object on the living room wall startled me. The walls are thin, so it's not unusual to hear pipes squeaking or old wood groaning. But this time, it feels different. That knock seemed intentional, a direct response to our actions. A confirmation that someone is watching and hearing our every move. That was the moment I realized I couldn't dismiss what was happening as mere coincidence. My pulse pounded in my ears, I felt like I was breathing through my mouth, each inhale shallower than the last. The light above us flickered once, twice, then stayed the same. My colleague and I exchanged worried looks, but neither of us said anything. We could only whisper to each other that we should put the board away for the night. I carried it up the creaky attic stairs, each step punctuated by the sound of my own breathing. I wish I could say it was over, but events only escalated from there. I woke up in the middle of the night to footsteps crunching in the hallway, heavy footsteps, as if someone was walking right outside my door. My heart was pounding so hard I was worried it might wake up the whole neighborhood. I mustered up the courage to turn on the light, hoping to see something normal, but only saw an empty hallway. However, the feeling of being watched stuck to me like a wet blanket. Every step I took felt like a trap, and I couldn't escape that invisible gaze. Every little noise became an alarm bell in my mind. The creak of a loose board, the sound of a tree branch tapping against the window, all these sounds crawled under my skin. I can't get out. More than once, I've found doors wide open after I was sure I had closed them. Drawers that I clearly remembered being closed were now only pulled open an inch or two, enough to send chills down my spine. Every time I closed the door, my sense of certainty that I had done the right thing was overtaken by doubt. How can I trust that no one is watching me from the outside? Am I imagining it? But the strange thing is, even when I stand face to face with what is obviously physical, I can't shake the feeling that something invisible is still watching me, still waiting. Something is definitely not right in this house. I cannot continue to live in this uncertainty. But can I truly be free of this fear, or will that presence follow me wherever I go? The question remains, hanging in the air. One particular night, I happened to find a jar in a basement door that was supposed to be locked. I can't remember unlocking it, and my colleague claims he never went down there. But what was even stranger was that strange marks started appearing on my arms. At first, they were just faint, light bruises that I tried to blame on my clumsiness. I thought maybe I had bumped into the corner of the table or pressed my hand against something in my sleep, but then they got darker and darker, with a clear shape. The lines of the fingertips were as if an invisible hand had grasped me, and I felt them as an indelible mark. More than one morning, I woke up panting, drenched in cold sweat, with new bruises appearing on my skin. My coworker noticed and indirectly asked if I was hurting myself. I told him I was just as confused as he was, unable to explain what was happening. The worst moment happened a week after we found the sign. I decided to move it to a small used closet on the first floor, thinking that if it wasn't in the attic, I could forget about its existence. But no, the atmosphere in the hallway was heavy, like going through a wet storm. My chest felt tight, every hair on my arm stood up, it felt like something invisible was approaching. I pressed the board against my body, turning the closet door handle with my other hand. But as soon as I opened that door, I felt something icy brush against the back of my neck, as if someone had just stood right behind me. Then came a sharp tug on my shoulder that made me turn around, my heart caught in my throat. I almost dropped the board, standing in breathless silence, feeling that I was facing something that shouldn't be seen. The hallway lights flickered violently, plunging me into semi-darkness. When it settled, I was alone, but my shoulder was numb and a chill lingered there. After that, I couldn't shake the impression that I was always being watched. Even in broad daylight, I sensed movement in my peripheral vision. This feeling is inexplicable, it follows me every moment, inseparable. My appetite disappeared, replaced by a gnawing feeling of anxiety in my stomach. I spent most afternoons locked in my room with the curtains drawn, trying to read or distract myself, but I couldn't concentrate. Every time I look at the walls, I feel like they are pressing against me, as if the house itself is trying to suffocate me. My coworkers tiptoed around me, clearly worried by the changes in my behavior. But neither of us openly acknowledged our growing terror. We knew something was wrong, but couldn't admit it to each other, as if it would be an admission that we had made a mistake by touching something that shouldn't have been touched. We spoke softly, discussing only the basics: food, rent, housework. We never discussed this board in depth. It was like we had tacitly agreed that talking about it would only inform whatever was happening. But at night, the sound of dragging footsteps became even clearer. Those steps, from the living room, then move into the kitchen, sometimes stopping right outside my room. I lay on the bed panting, my heart pounding like a hammer, hoping nothing could try the doorknob. Sometimes it just vibrates slightly, enough to relieve my nerves. I felt nauseous at how helpless I was against it. More than once I wondered if I was imagining things. Maybe I'm under severe stress or hallucinating from lack of sleep. But the bruises on my arms and the flashing lights were real, and my coworkers saw it too. We can't both hallucinate the same events. Finally, I decided that returning the board to the attic might be the key to restoring peace. One quiet afternoon, when the sun was just setting behind the neighboring houses, I took out the board from the cupboard on the first floor. The hallway was filled with a dim yellow light that didn't make me any less scared. My palms sweated so much that I almost dropped the plank down the stairs. Going up to the attic feels like going into a tomb. Dust particles floated in the slanted rays of light, the smell of old cardboard returned. I felt like I was entering a place where no one should enter, as if something was waiting for me. I placed the board in the same chest in which we had found it, covered it again with the cloth, and stood there, holding my breath, waiting for some sign of approval or refusal. Nothing obvious happened. The dusty silence remained, and I felt as if time had stopped, the air so thick I couldn't breathe. I slowly exhaled, the tension in my body lessened somewhat. I closed the trunk and left the attic, determined not to return. I wish I could say everything went back to normal after that. It doesn't, not quite, anyway. The immediate intensity of this phenomenon decreases, but minor phenomena persist. The bruises have stopped appearing, although I still have faint bruises that take weeks to fade. Those signs didn't go away, and I knew something was still clinging to me. Sometimes I walk past the attic door and feel a strange tingling sensation on my skin, like there's an electrical charge in the air. Each time, I tell myself that I shouldn't think about it, that it's over. But then those feelings came back, and I felt like something was watching me again, even though I had closed the attic door tightly. Can I really escape it? The lights flickered occasionally, and I heard footsteps in the quietest house. More than once I heard a dull creak somewhere in the wall, though it never came as close as before. My nights are more manageable, but I have never slept as peacefully as before. A doubt tugged at me, feeling like something was waiting for the right moment, patiently and waiting. I scoured online forums about haunted objects and cursed plaques, looking for any explanation that fit my experiences. But most of what I read sounded too theatrical, like scenes ripped from low-budget horror movies. I couldn't reconcile any of that with the visceral horror I felt. None of the stories described the chilling fear, the paralyzing cold I felt on my shoulders, or the frantic feeling of being constantly watched. So I put it out of my mind as best I could. But the truth is that I always jump in the weakest creek, and day by day I try to normalize my life. My colleagues rarely mentioned it, as if we had tacitly agreed not to reopen that wound. But no matter how hard I try to forget, I still believe that home has changed me. Even mundane tasks like washing dishes or taking out the trash become more difficult. I'm always hyper-aware of my environment, always feeling like the hairs on the back of my neck are on standby, preparing for another sign to show we've worked something out. Occasionally, I would catch a glimpse of my reflection in the bathroom mirror, noticing my pale skin and dark circles under my eyes. I'm a far cry from the person who first entered that house. One thing is certain, I feel like a part of myself is lost somewhere in the gloom of the attic, replaced by constant fatigue. One evening, while packing for a short trip out of town, I noticed the attic door looked a bit like ajar. I know I left it closed. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I stood at the foot of the attic stairs, overwhelmed by the memory of what had happened up there. I felt old fears sharpening my senses. Heart rate quickens, palms become clammy, muscles tense in fight or flight. In that moment, I wanted to rush out the front door and never come back. But I took a slow breath and climbed those stairs again. The overhead lights flickered to life, revealing the same chest in the corner, with a layer of dust swirling in the air. Nothing seemed disturbed, but I couldn't shake the impression that something invisible was waiting. That feeling kept covering me, making it impossible for me to escape. I closed the door behind me, then walked away, my legs shaking. I left for the trip early the next morning, hoping that I could shake off all that had happened. Relief flooded through me as soon as I drove away from my residence. In the days that followed, I slept much better than I had in the weeks before, but there was always a nagging feeling in the back of my mind, reminding me that I would eventually return. When I returned to my old house, everything was quiet. The first hours I spent there were mostly peaceful, no flashing lights, no unusual knocking on the door. But it feels like walking on thin ice, aware that one wrong step could throw everything back into chaos. Even though everything seemed peaceful, I couldn't completely dispel the fear in my heart. Despite all my previous disturbing experiences, I never found solid evidence of what was hidden in that house. There were no apparitions, no inexplicable voices, and I never found any footprints to follow. What I have are faint memories of cold fingers on my shoulders, bruises on my arms, and a terror so real I can still feel it lump in my chest if I think about it for too long. Finally, I moved away. My colleague, too, admitted he couldn't stand the stuffy atmosphere anymore, and we agreed it was the right decision. To this day, I can't be sure whether I escaped or just carried some of that darkness with me. Sometimes late at night in my new apartment, I imagine I hear those shuffling footsteps down the hallway. The wind rattled the windows or doors, and my breath caught in my throat. Was what happened real, or was I unable to truly escape it? And then I wondered, was the board still in the attic of that old house, gathering dust and waiting for the next person who couldn't resist its charm? Will the memories of it forever haunt me, every time I enter a room, every time I feel the space around me is too silent? Sometimes I wonder if what appears is always there, hidden in light and shadow, and the sign is nothing more than a key we foolishly turn. Now I live with a subtle unease, a nagging awareness that reality can tear at the edges to reveal things we are not ready to face. I may no longer wake up every morning with fresh bruises, but the memory of that icy grip is enough to remind me how thin the barrier is between what we know and what we fear. And in quiet moments, I caught myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a flash of light in the corner of my vision, an echo of whatever was still watching from the hidden corners of the silent old attic. For the first time I felt something was wrong. The air itself feels heavier, almost tense, as if it hinders my every breath. Even the morning light, usually so gentle in my countryside, seemed strained and sickly, draining the color from distant trees. I lived in that remote area for many years, lulled by the peaceful rhythm of farmland and jungle. But on that day, nothing felt familiar or welcoming. Little did I know that if I took a simple shortcut through the woods, would plunge myself into a disturbing mystery that wouldn't leave my thoughts. I was going to a neighboring house to assist with shed roof repairs when I decided to cut into a wooded area I rarely visit. It was still early and the autumn air was fresh enough to keep me awake. I moved quickly, my shoes crunching on leaves drenched in morning dew. The path was narrower than I remembered, choked with dense vegetation and briars clinging to my coat. Despite the obstacles, I felt inexplicably pulled forward, as if there was some underlying force that required me to continue. My heart rate quickened with excitement, though I dismissed it as the simple thrill of exploring an unfamiliar route. Going deeper into the bushes, I found a clearing dappled with pale sunlight. Standing in the middle of that gap were three strangers. Their faces turned toward me, lacking the hard lines one would expect from farmers accustomed to rough labor. Instead, there is a smoothness to their expressions, almost as if someone had smeared their features with a brush. A strangeness, as if they weren't real people. At first, I thought the glare was playing tricks on my eyes. I tried to focus on their eyes, but every time I tried, my vision seemed to blur. One of them, a tall figure with a strangely gentle gait, beckoned me closer, indicating they were building a small cabin in the clearing. We stood there, in the middle of the forest and the dim light, while those strangers kept looking at me, as if waiting for me to come closer. I felt an inexplicable attraction, an invitation I couldn't refuse. But right at that moment, a strange feeling arose within me. Maybe I got too close to something I shouldn't know, maybe they weren't just normal strangers. They called out to me, using quiet tones, to see their progress. My heart pounded with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. From a respectful distance, I noticed freshly cut logs, a rudimentary frame and antique-looking tools. Rust clings to metal edges as if they had been discarded long ago before returning to use. There was no outright mention of what this work might be, only vague assurances that it was important for the land. My instincts told me something was off, but I found myself drawn to their quiet confidence. Even their old-fashioned way of speaking, though subdued, made me tingle with anxiety. They didn't invite me to stay long, just suggested I could come back if I wanted to see how the project was progressing. After a brief time in clearing, I forced myself to leave, giving polite excuses. My heart pounded harder as I backed away, not sure why I felt both drawn to and repelled by these strangers. The entire trip to my neighborhood, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped out of my familiar world into a place that didn't quite belong. The forest seemed darker than usual. The brush is layered with shadows even in the midday light, as if the sun has retreated to a safer distance. When I reached my destination, a cold sweat clung to the back of my neck. Over the next few days, I found my thoughts returning again and again to the clearing and its mysterious occupants. I continued to dream about the forest, hearing something call my name in a voice both kind and disapproving. Every morning I wake up with my heart racing and my sheets damp with sweat. I told myself these dreams were the product of an overactive imagination. But the feeling of discomfort will not loosen me. Ultimately, I decided to go back to that, hoping to reassure myself that I'd imagined nothing more than a few eccentrics living off the grid. The day was wet and cold, a drizzle clung to my hair and dripped on my cheeks as I retreated. The distinct shape of a cabin frame was gone, replaced by disintegrating pieces of wood, dark with age where the tools had once stood. Lumps of rust sunk into the soil. It was as if decades had passed since anyone had dared to build on that spot. My throat was dry and my breath was sharp. It didn't make sense. Less than a week had passed. Surely not enough time for this level of decay. I circled, scanning the ground for footprints or any sign that the three strangers had returned. But nothing. No trace, no presence, just a void filled with darkness and strangeness. And in that silence, I felt a chill run down my spine. The only impressions I could see were my own, passing through the muddy earth. Even the growth I remembered near the edges looked different. Overgrown branches and knotted roots in patterns too intricate to be natural. A fierce wind tore through the trees, stinging my eyes with tiny splinters. The forest seemed eager to drive out, and I felt it was changing strangely, as if something was awakening in the ground. The same night, I started hearing voices just outside my field. They were faint, almost drowned out by the whisper of the wind through the pines, but unmistakably human. At first, I couldn't say any words, only the rhythm of the distant call. Something in those voices reminded me of the way the three strangers had spoken, calm, measured and hidden in timeless times. I found myself stuck in a cycle. My curiosity asked me to investigate, but every time I tried to step into the woods at night, the air seemed thicker, heavier. The trees appear like silent soldiers. Darkness writhed beneath their canopy, and the path became a corridor of uncertainty. Every rustle and crack until I felt certain I wasn't alone. More than once, I turned back with a pounding heart, convinced that if I went any further, I would step into a place where I did not belong. Sleep took refuge. In my mind, they echoed from inside my house, drifting through halls that appeared distorted, as if I was seeing them through warped glass. When I woke up, I found myself drenched in sweat, chest deep, as if I had run for miles. My lungs heaved, and a tremor ran through my limbs. Sometimes the call will continue to fade even after I sit up straight, as if daring me to follow. During the day, I tried to rationalize what was happening. I suspect some trick of the mind. Maybe I happened upon an old homestead and confused the timeline of its destruction. Logic could not explain how those records had decayed so quickly, nor why my entire body rebelled whenever I tried to re-enter the clearing. He thought I was working too hard, that the isolation was taking its toll on my mind. He advised me to stay away from those woods until I felt more comfortable. His concerns were genuine, but did little to quell my growing misgivings. Within a week, I could no longer avoid the need to see for myself what was hidden beyond the threshold of the tree. One evening, armed with a powerful flashlight and a will strengthened by desperation, I ventured to the edge of the forest. The path faded before my eyes as I moved deeper into the forest. The whispers started again, all around me, as if the forest knew I was approaching. And in that dark space, I felt there was something waiting for me, maybe an explanation, or maybe an answer that I couldn't escape. Cold night. Even the usual chorus of insects has fallen silent, as if they are too afraid of attracting attention. My footsteps were the only sound, each step echoing in the silence. My heart was beating so hard that I could feel my rib cage tremble. Soon, I heard the same spectral call. It emanates from deeper within where the clearing waits. A strange feeling began to overtake me. Every time I advanced, the temperature seemed to drop and the wind carried an almost mournful tone. My vision blurred at the edges and twisting pressure built in the back of my head. I fought the urge to turn around, forcing my body forward, determined to unravel this mystery. But as I approached where I expected the boards to rot, an overwhelming force pressed against my chest. It felt like riding on an invisible tide. Each movement required Herculean effort, my limbs trembled from resistance. A raw panic lay in my throat, my breathing came in ragged bursts, cold sweat hung down on my forehead, and my eyes closed. I steadied myself against a silly tree trunk, shining my flashlight ahead. The beam of light cut through the darkness and revealed a cluster of broken wood. It was as if time wavered around them, causing the edges of their forms to flicker. An unshakable fear took hold of me. It wasn't simply fear of the unknown, but a primal certainty that I had trespassed into something that didn't want me there. Every nerve in me screamed for me to retreat. I stumbled backwards, almost dropping my flashlight. Despite my determination, I could go no further. That invisible barrier, as thick as a wall of water, pushed me away, draining my resolve. Lungs are burning, tears hurt my eyes for reasons I still can't fully articulate. Since that night, my life has been consumed by a feeling of permanent discomfort. Even inside my home, I feel as if the forest is leaning towards me, stretching its darkness to my doorstep. The usual sounds, the wind against the shutters, the creaks of the old wooden floor have become suspect. My nerves are frayed, keeping me on constant alert for the next unexplained phenomenon. Sleep is a battlefield, a realm where voices grow increasingly clear, whispering incomprehensible phrases that I can't completely recall when I wake up. As the days stretched into weeks, I fought to maintain my sanity. Realistic missions become epic challenges. My appetite waned, and when I did eat, my stomach was tight with stress. Every time I turned around to look directly, there would be nothing but swaying tree branches and changing moonlight. However, the oppressive impression of being watched never left me. Finally, despair overcame me. My steps were unsteady as I marched through the forest again. The harsh morning light, cutting across the trees at sharp angles, illuminated the dust motes dancing in the stale air. The forest smelled of damp earth and decomposing leaves, an overwhelming scent that made me gag. I pressed until I reached the familiar spot. The rest of the cabin is exactly as before. Rotten wood and rusted tools litter the landscape as evidence of an abandoned world. There was no sign of strangers. There were no silhouettes, but the silence was eerie, and the longer I stood there, the more I felt that oppressive force. A cold stroked my bones, and every breath felt labored. My heart was pounding with such intensity that my hands were shaking. The silence was so absolute that I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. I felt that I was still not welcome, that the clearing itself denied me my presence. A wave of nausea rolled over me and my vision blurred around the edges as if the trees had closed in. I felt nothing but cold, wet ground. There are no hidden doors, no confusing symbols carved into the ground. Yet the space around me seemed to hum with a barely suppressed power. A strange and complicated feeling as if something I couldn't understand was weighing on me. Clasping my arms with my legs, I half ran, half staggered back along the overgrown trail, tree branches scraping my arms like delicate fingers trying to hold me back. When I returned to the familiar edge of my property, I felt as if I had escaped from a dream turned nightmare. Although I tried to leave again, I was left with the distinct impression that I could never completely free myself from its influence. It lingered in my mind, an intrusive thought that refused to fade, always reminding me of what I had encountered. The forest outside my window was motionless in the moonlight as if it were holding its breath. My throat felt tight and my fingertips trembled on the page. I have tried sharing my experiences with others only to be met with polite skepticism or vague concern. A few suggested I should just sell my place and move. Maybe that will bring rest. But some deeper instinct warned me that whatever lay in that clearing was not bound by geography. It reached out once, reeling in blurred faces and hidden promises of work, and it can do so again wherever I go. This feeling cannot escape me. It became a part of me, as if I couldn't separate myself from that darkness. So, can I really get rid of it? Or will the things I have encountered always follow me, extending darkness into every corner of my life? No matter where I run, can I cleanse this darkness or will it always find me? I decided to stay, not out of courage, but out of a compulsion to discover the truth. The glimpses I've caught, the rotten cabin that shouldn't have been left to rot, the voices calling in the night, the feeling of a secret older than I could understand, have changed my perception of reality. Whether it is a force tied to the land or a product of an overwhelmed mind, I cannot say, but I feel its presence every time I approach a part of the forest. A powerful reminder that some boundaries are protected for reasons beyond human understanding. My sanity clung to the notion that there had to be a reasonable explanation. But in my heart of hearts, I suspect that rationality is not enough to explain the unnatural. So I waited, gripped by a wary terror. Night after night, I sat in the dark, listening to the wind for that familiar call. Sometimes it resonates on the edge of hearing. Other times there is only silence. Even in that silence, though, I feel the watchful eyes. My body tenses at the slightest sound, an adrenaline rush rushes into my veins. Yet I have found no clear answer, no solution. My only certainty is the oppressive weight of the void in my memory as if it were a living creature in the silence of the forest. These memories repel me, but they beckon me, mocking my inability to understand it. I suspect I may never truly escape. Yet as long as I do not venture too far into its domain, it seems to allow me to exist on the periphery. Perhaps it is the most disturbing conclusion of all, that I am allowed to stay here only by whatever ancient designs haunt those forests. And so my life continues to coexist with this mystery. My nights are spent anticipating a final revelation that may never come. The fear never leaves. It burrows beneath my skin, coiling around every heartbeat. Even if I somehow manage to move away one day, the memory of that decaying cabin and its faded figures will follow me. The forest holds its secrets close. And I have learned that they are not secrets for outsiders to discover. Yet I live, suspended between fear and necessity, haunted but alive. Every dawn I feel a slight loosening of the tension in my chest, a growing remorse. But the relief is always partial, temporary at best. So, I have accepted that no matter how many times I see the ruins of that cabin, or how many times I feel a presence repelling me, I will never fully understand. The secrets in that forest will never be explained, and I will forever live with that incomprehensible presence. Meanwhile, I remain vigilant. My senses are sharpened by fear. Terror had become a part of me, a persistent shadow in my peripheral vision. And if the forest calls again, I'm prepared, though not eager, to answer. I felt something following me from the moment I entered the house that night. The air seemed heavy and stagnant, as if every corner was holding its breath in anticipation of some impending disaster. There was no warmth left in my home, no sense of refuge or safety, only a suffocating feeling that something deeply wrong had made its nest here. Every hair on my body pricked with awareness, and I could almost taste the bitterness of fear on my tongue. I told myself it was just my imagination, fueled by the choice we had made. But somehow I know it's more than that. We invited something in, and now it refuses to leave. The financial stress has been unrelenting for months, pressing down on me like an iron deputy. I can feel its grip in my chest whenever the bills pile up, whenever the phone rings with reminders. My friend, let me call him Marcus, endured similar turmoil. We both felt cornered, financially strangled, and desperate for a reprieve that never seemed to come through conventional means. One evening he came to me with an idea, an old ritual he had discovered in a half-circled book with unrecognizable symbols and ancient instructions. We reasoned that we had nothing to lose. At least that was the lie we told ourselves. There was a promise hidden between the lines of the dusty text that some unnamed entity could grant us a stroke of fortune if we only followed each step exactly. It may have sounded absurd even then, but desperation makes the best of our fools. We sealed the attic door one cold, drizzly night with old wooden boards and rusty nails. The guidelines are clear about containing energy in a space. With just a few candles to light the cramped darkness, we drew symbols from the book on the floor. My hands shook as I traced the lines with the chalk, and I remember the flickering light that made the forms change whenever I blinked, as if they were alive. Marcus stood beside me, breathing shallowly, eyes wide and skin glistening with sweat. But in our desperation, we convinced ourselves that this was a small gamble compared with the crushing weight of our debts. We felt a sudden, terrible stillness as we chanted. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the attic. That silence filled the room, heavy, as if the air was gradually thickening around us. Something had been invited in, and I felt its presence. We risked our own safety for an unclear promise, and now we are trapped in an agreement that is incomprehensible. So, what did we really invite in? Was it just our paranoia, or was there really something out there, something that could haunt us forever? From that night, everything seemed to change, and I couldn't escape. This fear was ingrained in me. The candles flickered violently and the shadows on the wall seemed to twist into shape. Then, without warning, the biggest candle went out, plunging half of the attic into black. Marcus tried to speak, but all that came out was a stuttering hoarse. We felt nothing concrete in the first moments. There were no big shows, no signs of victory that money would pour into our pockets, just an overwhelming feeling that we had opened a door best left closed. Over the following days, subtle changes began to creep through my house. At first, they were almost unacceptable. A soft scratch in the walls late at night, occasionally combined with faint tapping sounds that drift from room to room. My heart pounded every time I woke up to those noises. Sweat soaked into my sheets, my breathing was ragged. I told myself it was just a mouse or squirrel on the wall. But the more I listened, the more it became clear that this was something else entirely. The sounds were too deliberate, too carefully spaced, as if something was measuring the distance between each tap. There are moments I swear I can feel its presence standing on the other side of the drywall, pressing its ear close to me. Then the object started moving. Subtly at first, a chair I remembered leaving in the corner would be pushed up onto a table. A lamp from my desk would appear in the hallway, angled as if it had been placed down with purpose. Marcus insisted I probably just forgot where I put them. But I detected a tremor in his voice whenever he tried to reassure me. He had started hearing similar noises in his apartment, although he seemed hell-bent on keeping that fact quiet. His weary eyes, echoing with the darkness, told me more than his pauses could. One night, as I drifted into a restless sleep, I felt a passing through the room. It felt like the winter air had forced its way in, bit through my sheets and settled to my bones. My breath caught in my throat, and I was acutely aware of my own heartbeat beating like a drum in my ears. Then a whisper, my whisper in my ear. I froze, my muscles stiffened, a cold sweat trickled down my spine. It was a sound I can only describe as a broken voice, sliding through syllables that barely made any sense. I tried taking a shot on the bedside lamp, but the bulb flashed once and died. The darkness felt alive, pressing against my eyelids, denying me the comfort of illumination. I lay there paralyzed until the whispering faded and I could finally force my limbs to move. I found myself in the kitchen, rummaging through the empty cupboards for something to eat and felt a weight press against my back. My skin will prick and my heart will beat until I have to spin around, hoping to catch a figure lurking there. Sometimes I see a fleeting shape slipping around the corner, too vague to be certain, but distinct enough to know that I'm not alone. My lips would be dry, and I'd feel this overwhelming sense of vulnerability, as if every mistake I'd ever made was laid bare under that watchful gaze. The house seemed to amplify each of my worries, turning them into physical manifestations that gnawed at my sanity. He said he felt like something was pulling at him at work, even in the bright fluorescent light of the office hallway. He claimed to see a shadowy form standing in the reflection of his computer screen, only for it to disappear when he turned around. We both unraveled under the unrelenting stress. The burden of financial ruin combined with this new inexplicable turmoil offers no relief, only further torment. I started missing deadlines, losing focus on even the simplest tasks, plagued by a constant feeling of impending doom. Marcus confessed that he was thinking about quitting his job altogether. But we both know that will only tighten the noose of our monetary affairs. I tried to banish it by skipping the rituals we performed. For a while, I imagined that if I pretended nothing was happening, it might fade. But the entity, whatever it is, seems to feed our avoidance. The more we run away from confronting it, the stronger it becomes. I found scratches on my bedroom wall one morning, 4 parallel lines deep enough to scratch paint and plaster. They looked evil, like the tracks of a wild animal. My stomach turned over at the sight, and I suddenly found it difficult to breathe. I noticed that my reflection in the mirror behind me was shaking, my face pale, dark circles under my eyes. It is impossible to eliminate what is happening. By then, both my dreams and my waking hours were consumed with the feeling of being haunted. Sometimes, I wonder if the presence is just an expression of my own guilt and anxiety. But the physical signs around me proved otherwise. I want to clean the walls, cover the symbols in the attic, remove any reminders of that night. Deep down, I suspect we were both afraid that tampering with the symbols would cause something much worse. Perhaps it will even release this presence fully, granting it the freedom to roam beyond the limits of my property. The hallways felt longer than they should have, each squeaky floor amplifying my anxiety. The lights flicker at odd intervals, as if reacting to negative energy swirling in every corner. My hands would shake uncontrollably as I bent down to pick up whatever I had dropped, convinced that something would grab me from behind. My breathing often comes in hot waves, and I feel my temples throbbing. The attic itself has been off limits for a long time. None of us dared open that closed door again, but the knowledge of what lay behind it was pressed into my mind. I developed the habit of staring at the ceiling, sure I could hear scratching or muffled noises up there. My heart would clench, my chest ache with stress. There was one night when I heard a deep groaning sound from the attic, like a heavy piece of furniture being dragged across the floor. The nails we used to seal the door screeched shut, and I was sure they would be torn from the wood. I hardly slept until dawn. When the pale morning light finally crept through my window, I found the attic door still closed. But the nails were knocked out halfway, bowing as if something was trying to push it into the hallway. With my mind fraying at the edges, I resolved to confront what we had done. Marcus hesitated, almost paralyzed by the horrors that afflicted him. He continued to make half-hearted promises about coming back to help me clean the attic. But each time he disappears into his own problems or simply freezes when the time comes. In the swirl of confusion and fear, I felt a strange determination crystallize within me. If we don't try something, we will forever be trapped by this suffocating horror. So, late one evening, I turned off all the lights in the house except for a single flashlight and forced myself to climb the stairs to the attic. When I reached the top, I found the chalk marks on the floor exactly as we had left them, although they appeared to have darkened. They look more like burns or stains than chalk, an almost black residue pulsing with invisible energy. The flashlight's beam wavered in my shaking hand, casting erratic shadows on the wooden beams low overhead. My senses tell me I am not alone. Something was there, just beyond the edges of the light, looking at me with vexed curiosity. But as I stood there, the oppressive atmosphere hit me in waves, almost buckling my knees. The flashlight flashed, and for a second I thought I saw a contradictory shape high in the corner of the attic, looming and angular like a figure folded over itself. My body reacted with paralyzing terror. Sweat poured down my back. My skin was pricked and my lungs seized. The figure disappeared in the next light, but I felt its gaze linger. Summoning what little courage still had, I opened the old book Marcus had brought, flicking through the pages with a flashlight. The instructions for the banishment have been mixed up, scrolled in ancient symbols that are difficult to decipher. I imitated the gestures illustrated on the crisp page, traced the inverted shapes on the symbols on the attic floor. The words felt twisted in my mouth. My voice cracked and every syllable tasted metallic and wrong. The air grew colder and colder, as if the temperature had suddenly plummeted, and my breath was blurred in the flashlight beam. I felt movement around me, soft rustling, a distortion of space, as if the shadow itself was winding tighter. A final trembling phrase left my lips, and the attic erupted in a flurry of whispers, circling me like a swarm of insects. My flashlight flickered, threatening to die. In that oppressive darkness, I felt a push against my chest. Not physically, but in a way that made it real to my mind, as if it were draining me of all hope. My legs threatened to give out, and for a few terrifying seconds, I believed I would disappear into the void with that presence. Then, as quickly as it began, the swirling madness receded. The attic was quiet and the temperature seemed to rise a few degrees, just enough for me to notice. My heart still pounded like a hammer, but there was no immediate feeling of a lasting, tangible character. It feels like something has been forced back behind the threshold, at least partially. Not taking a chance, I covered the icons with an old carpet that I found pushed behind some boxes. I want them hidden from view, even if it's just a flimsy barrier. As I walked down the steps, I saw Marcus waiting in the hallway, his face ashen and haunted. He told me quietly through broken explanations, that he had heard something scream there, although my ears only registered angry whispers. He seemed relieved that I had taken action, but also too shaken to fully process what it all meant. None of us believes that we have banished the entity completely. There is no sudden shower or magical end to our debts. Instead, there remains a tangible sense of borrowed time, as if the house itself is holding its breath for the return of presence. I still occasionally catch flickers of movement in my peripheral vision, especially in dimly lit rooms. Some nights, I hear a creaking sound in the wall, faint but intentional. For the most part, however, I can function without feeling as if every second is going to end in disaster. My steps are lighter but still cautious, my heart doesn't beat as fiercely as before when a blast of cold air blows through the hallway. Perhaps the ritual forced the entity into a state of hibernation. Or maybe it's simply waiting for a better opportunity to remind me that it's still here. I don't know which possibility worries me more. What I do know is that my life is no longer normal and my financial difficulties are as oppressive as ever. The difference is that now there is a darkness that binds my soul, a reminder that I once tried to bargain with forces beyond my understanding. I couldn't help but feel that presence revived the despair Marcus and I still carried, fueling that invisible energy whenever we despaired about the future. Sometimes I wonder if the ultimate price is the gradual deterioration of our sanity, a constant feeling of fear that no amount of money can assuage. No one died and no children were harmed. Nothing too dramatic or final. But a part of me was reclaimed by the ritual. There's no question about it. I could feel it through the dull pain behind my eyes when I woke up. In the uncomfortable silence that filled the house at dusk. Even if I leave this place, I am sure that the remaining memories and presence will follow me, eating into my soul like a stubborn fragment. In the quiet, still hours of the night, I find myself listening for a trickle or a whisper, bracing for the possibility that what we have summoned is just taking its time. And it's in those silent moments, when everything seems calm, that my heart beats the fastest. Because I know that silence can also be the prelude to an obsession worse than any sound. As soon as I entered the house, I knew something was wrong. The air felt heavier, like it was passing through a thick, invisible fog, pressing against my skin and settling in my lungs. My chest tightened with an inexplicable discomfort, and each inhale tasted stale, as if the air had grown stagnant after my brief absence. Even the entrance felt darker, the overhead light seemed dimmer than usual, as if refusing to illuminate the space I was standing in. It's a subtle change, but it's enough to stop me in my tracks. Memories of that antique market appeared in my mind. My eyes turned to the package under my arm. 2 special amulets that I suddenly bought while traveling abroad. When I returned, no one welcomed me because I lived alone. For the first time, however, I had a strange feeling of anticipation that someone or something was standing in the hallway. My heart pounded, and I forced myself to break that hesitation by stepping forward. The floor creaked ominously as if the house was sending out a warning. Oh, I feel like I'm shaking for no reason. Exhausted after the trip, I told myself. Just exhausted. However, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I had brought back more than just souvenirs from that foreign market. I placed the amulets on the shelf in the living room. They were small, about the size of the palm of my hand, carved from a dark, shiny material that seemed neither entirely metal nor entirely stone. Strange symbols spiraled around their surfaces, forming patterns I didn't recognize. One was shaped vaguely like a mask with hollow eye sockets. The other looked like a coiled snake biting its own tail. Their presence demands attention. Even at a glance, I felt drawn in, as if the shapes themselves were changing in my peripheral vision. A faint humming sound lingered in my head. A delicate pulse, as if the objects resonated with my heartbeat. By that evening, I understood that my initial feeling of fear was more than just paranoia. Little bad luck started piling up from the moment I put down the amulet. The overhead light in the living room flickered sporadically, then dimmed for a moment before returning to full brightness. The power in that room had never been unreliable before. Some items fall off the shelves for no apparent reason. Picture frames, a decorative vase, even a simple book had been held up moments before. Every time I heard a thud or a crash, my heart would pound and an irrational feeling of panic would come over me. I tried to brush it off, but there was an unmistakable heaviness in the room. It seemed like the air had become cruel, weighing on me with every passing hour. Around 9 o'clock, the antique clock on the wall suddenly stopped. The second hand stuck, frozen at exactly 5 minutes on the hour, and the steady ticking I had grown accustomed to over the years fell dead silent. My stomach nodded in response. I bent down to check the watch, turned the key into its mechanism, tried to wind it again, but to no avail. The silence of that stagnant clock seemed more important than a mere accident. It was like a signal, a threshold had been crossed. A few hours later, as I was trying to sleep, I heard faint sounds echoing from downstairs. At first, I thought it was the sound of the wind rushing through the hallways, but the noise became clearer and clearer. A soft, muffled laugh, like a distant chuckle behind a closed door. My body tensed. I pressed my ear to the bedroom floorboards, holding my breath. The laughter was real, but I was alone. That feeling of isolation gave me goosebumps. I stayed up all night, every muscle tense, my mind spinning with questions. Sometimes I thought I heard a whisper. Other times, it's just a sudden silence, a void of sound that feels louder than the noise. As daylight appeared, the tension eased but did not disappear. I ventured into the living room to check the amulet. They're still where I left them, but they look different. There's something about the surface that seems more reflective. When I looked towards them, I could have sworn I saw my own reflection looking back, twisted and crooked like a crooked smile. I blinked and the image disappeared, leaving me with a pounding heart and clammy hands. A wave of insecurity rolled up in my heart. I told myself it was the corner of the morning sun, a play of light. However, the logic feels empty. Over the next few days, my nerves were frayed as disturbing events continued to occur. The living room light will turn off automatically when I'm reading a book. The water pipes groaned incessantly at odd hours, making human-sized noises. And then there were footsteps. Soft, deliberate steps in the attic or ceiling, back and forth above my head in the dead of night. Every time I tried to investigate, flashlight in hand, I found no one and nothing, just empty darkness and dusty floorboards. However, the sound will resume as soon as I go down. With each repeated occurrence, the knot in my stomach tightened, as if my body recognized a predator stalking me from unseen corners. Unable to ignore the growing fear, I decided to quarantine the amulets. Maybe they're putting me in danger. Logic insisted they were harmless objects, but my instincts screamed otherwise. I don't want them in my living room anymore. Every look in their direction made me nauseous. I tried to remember the face of the person who sold it to me, a haggard figure with deep-set eyes, but the memory was hazy. I recall the palpable sense of relief in the salesman's expression when I agreed to buy them, as if he couldn't wait to get them to me. That memory alone makes my heart flutter uncomfortably. So I put them in a small wooden box, covered it, and took it to the basement. My basement is cramped and damp, the kind of space where every echo lingers for too long. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, emitting a nauseating flicker. I tucked the box on a shelf in a dusty corner behind old paint cans and holiday decorations I never use. Standing there, I felt the pressure of my pulse in my ears. My mouth was dry and my forehead was covered in a thin layer of sweat. It was as if I was performing some forbidden act. My whole body trembled with anxiety until I set foot on the basement stairs to leave. I expected relief when the amulet was out of sight. But that night, I lay awake hearing new, stronger knocks echoing through the walls. The tension in my body skyrocketed until my temples pounded and my breathing became rapid. A little after midnight, a door on the main floor slammed shut with a sharp clang, causing me to jump out of bed in terror. My skin pricked with the certain feeling that someone or something was in my house. I tiptoed into the hallway, every nerve on edge. My body felt weak, as if the blood had drained from my limbs. Silence fell again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from behind. Every time I turn around, I only see empty hallways. The emotional pain of these nights has eroded my sanity. My eyes twitched from lack of sleep and I found myself constantly sweating, even though the thermostat was set to low. Sometimes in the corner of my vision I catch a glimpse of a silhouette, a shape that disappears as soon as I focus on it. I began to question what was real and what was just a byproduct of my exhaustion and frayed nerves. Yet every new shock, a random explosion, a flicker of light, a small rattling noise that sounded like breathing, reminded me that this was more than just a hallucination. I became more and more reclusive. Friends called to ask how the trip was going, and I only gave vague answers, careful not to reveal the paranoia that was gradually unraveling my daily life. One time a neighbor stopped by to see if everything was okay because he heard strange noises at night. My voice trembled as I assured him that I was cleaning late at night and the noise must have traveled through the walls. Inside, my heart pounded with fear that whatever presence was lurking in my house would reveal itself. I realized I was shaking so much that my hands left sweat stains on the doorknob. On one particularly harrowing night, the electricity in the entire house was cut just as I was climbing the stairs to my bedroom. I froze, sinking into complete darkness. My heart was pounding so hard that I felt it in my throat and sweat was pouring down my back. I strained my ears and sure enough there were footsteps or something like footsteps moving around below. Then there was a light scratching sound like nails dragging on the wall. My breathing increased in short bursts and I realized I was shaking uncontrollably. For a brief moment, a wave of dizziness washed over me and I feared I might pass out. The flickering lights came back on after endless minutes. I found scratches on the wallpaper downstairs, jagged thin lines running across the hallway. My blood turned cold. I don't have pets and I know I haven't made those marks yet. However, I still refused to go down to the basement to check the amulet. I wanted to pretend I wasn't bringing any evil forces into my home. But the signs are everywhere. My reason confirmed that I was suffering from a long-term mental disorder caused by stress. But a deeper part of me knew something else was going on. Something vibrated with an invisible menace. Within a few more days of this torment, I reached a point of despair. I can hardly eat. My appetite disappeared under the constant weight of fear. My face has been drawn. Dark circles deepened under my eyes. My reflection in the mirror looked haunting. Not healthy. Darkness clung to my features and the lines around my mouth seemed deeper. Anxiety weighed heavily in my chest like a living entity, tightening its grip with each passing hour. I decided I could no longer ignore the amulets in the basement. I need them out of my life completely. The idea of throwing them in the trash is not enough, as if they will find their way back. The image of those rummaging through them makes me shudder. On the last day, just before dark, I got the wooden box. My steps down to the basement were measured, prepared for any sudden noises or movements in the dark. When I picked up the box, it was unusually cold. A chill seeped into my hands despite the warm, stuffy air. A wave of dizziness hit me. I leaned against the basement wall, swallowing hard to fight the rising nausea. Even through the forest, I swear I felt a faint vibration, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. My chest tightened with fear, and a primal urge compelled me to get rid of those cursed objects once and for all. I drove to a remote area miles from my home, a place hidden by gnarled trees and wild bushes. Throughout the journey, my knuckles turned white on the steering wheel and my thoughts raced between doubt and determination. The road stretches without any other cars. As time went on, the sky became darker and I felt as if the night would swallow me if I hesitated. When I finally parked the car, complete darkness had fallen. The only light came from the dim glow of the moon behind thin clouds. I grabbed a small shovel from the trunk, clutching the box with the other hand. My breathing quickened with each step into the bush, and the sound of owls calling in the distance gave me goosebumps. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple as I knelt on the damp ground. I dug frantically, pushing the cold dirt aside until I made a hole big enough to fit the box in. After burying the amulets, the main character felt a strange quietness covering his house. However, not long after, a feeling of insecurity arose again. Small sounds in the house, fleeting movements in the corner of his view, and strange reflections made him unable to shake the feeling that something was still watching him. Every time he hears a knock on the door or feels pushed out of bed at night, he falls into a state of stress and confusion, not knowing if it's real or just a product of psychological fear. Although he tried to avoid and even tried to deny the invisible presence in the house, the fear still did not let go. The long nights became harsher when the laughter of unknown origin rang out again, reminding him of the existence of something beyond his control. The fatigue and isolation became more and more evident, and he finally had to face his fear at the thought of having to go back and face those strange objects. In quiet moments, he realized that the amulets were not just objects but also symbols of the intersection between the real world and invisible forces. Fear is no longer just ordinary fear but an eternal haunting of the past. No matter how much he tried, he couldn't escape the flashbacks and inexplicable stalking. His psychology becomes more and more stressed when there is no longer salvation from reasonable actions. Signs and presences in the house seem to signal that things are not over yet. The story ends with an opening to the possibility that the fear he carries may never truly end, and that the memories of the invisible shadow may continue to haunt him forever. The main character begins to feel strange changes in the office space. Even though the room was empty, he still felt like something was wrong. Subtle but obvious signs, like a slight pounding in his temples or a stuffy air, begin to press in on him, making him feel like he's being watched. The main character begins to sense strange changes in the office space. Even though the room was empty, he still felt like something was wrong. Subtle but obvious signs, like the slight pounding in his temples or the stuffy air, began to press in on him, making him feel like he was being watched. The clown statue seems to bring an inexplicable obsession. At first, his friend just thought it was a strange decoration, but over time, he began to realize its strangeness. Signs that he couldn't deny, like the statue's distorted smile and empty eyes, made him always feel like something was watching him. The main character's sense of security and reason begins to crumble. He, who had always relied on logic and data, now found himself in a state of confusion, unable to explain the phenomena he was experiencing. The feeling of insecurity and fear increased every time he looked at the statue, and everything around him seemed to be related to that item. At one point, the main character decides to try to get rid of that obsession by removing the statue. However, no matter how hard he tried, the statue continued to haunt his mind, like an invisible danger always present in his space. The statue is not just an object, but it has become a symbol of the invasion of an invisible force into the main character's living space. Strange events continue to occur, such as flashing lights, strange noises, and the feeling that someone is nearby even though he is sure he is alone. This event made him even more confused and scared. The main character begins to realize that the strangeness is not limited to small changes in space but also involves the sensations he feels. Every time he looked towards the statue, he felt as if an invisible change occurred in space. This makes him feel that things are no longer the same, even though he tries to explain and control his feelings. The feeling of presence grew stronger. Phenomena such as flashing lights, moving objects, and unexplained noises cause the character to begin to suspect that there is something more than simply fatigue or stress. He can't seem to escape his obsession with the statue, even though his mind tries to convince him that it is just the imagination of someone who is too stressed. Every night, the character cannot sleep peacefully, haunted by feelings of insecurity and tension in his body. The dreams and nightmares became stronger, as the clown statue seemed to be chasing him in the space of his mind. Every day when he woke up, the feeling of fatigue and anxiety became more obvious. It feels like someone is always watching him from behind or from the walls of the house, making the character unable to feel at peace. Even though everything seemed normal, he couldn't deny the feeling of fear the statue created, even though it was just a harmless decoration. The scene where the character returns to the office and sees the moving clown statue is described as a climax in the story. The presence of the statue is no longer just a harmless object. Every time he approached it, the feeling of fear grew stronger, as if it was raising its arms to wave, as if it wanted to communicate with him or threaten him. And the main character continues to fight his growing fear and paranoia about the statue. Every time he thinks he can control the situation, a new strange event occurs, leaving him unable to rest easy. This feels like a long nightmare with no clear end in sight. The character gradually realizes that this is not just a psychological battle anymore, but a real battle with a force that he cannot explain. The transformation from mild anxiety to extreme obsession gives the story a new depth, an inescapable truth. The feeling of obsession continues to occupy the main character's mind. The clown statue was not just a harmless decoration, but now it became the embodiment of all the bad things he went through. Every night, when the faint light from the lamp shines into the office, the statue seems to come alive. Not only did it stand there, but sometimes, for a fleeting moment, it seemed to him that it was moving. The bizarre events don't stop at the statue's movements. Time and space in the house began to change strangely. The shadows seemed to swallow the rooms, stretching longer and deeper, pushing the character into areas he does not recognize. Sometimes, he finds himself waking up in unfamiliar spaces in the house, as if something is twisting the space, causing him to lose his way in his own home. The giggles rang out again, this time not just from the statue, but from the room around him, as if they were mocking him. Each sound made his heart ache, a reminder that he was no longer in control of everything. One night, when he woke up in the middle of the night, the clown statue was no longer lying still in the corner. It's gone. In that moment, he felt a movement in the air, something invisible was following him. The stench spread in the room, an indescribable feeling that made him suffocate. Strange footsteps, echoing from the living room, from under the attic, made him tremble. No longer just an obsession with an object, but an invisible entity, invisible, but always present, watching his every move. The main character's resolve gradually weakens as he realizes he cannot escape. Every time he tried to let things go, everything came back with more force. Not just a statue anymore, but a dark force controlling his mind and body. He began to see fantastic images in the walls, where the shadows were no longer just shadows, they began to take shape. The shapes of strange creatures, sometimes lonely human figures, sometimes glowing red eyes flashing in the darkness, seemed to be watching him from behind. One night, he decided to face the truth and opened the basement door to check the box containing the amulet, where he thought his obsession was buried. When he opened the lid of the box, memories of those haunting days came rushing back strongly. Inside was not just the amulet, but another object, a dark, orb-like object, radiating an indescribable power. As soon as he picked it up, everything around him began to change. Space seemed to contract and expand at the same time, suddenly twisting. The walls, ceilings, floors, all seemed to start to become disordered and distorted. The smell of decay rose from the air, as if everything was being devoured by something beyond his understanding. Finally, when he felt like he was about to fall into a bottomless pit, he realized that this presence was no longer just a physical object. It was a creature, an ancient entity that was awakened when he tried to change reality. What you called an amulet was just a door open to destruction. With every step he took deeper into the realm of darkness, the fear and tension increased. Memories, feelings of presence have completely blurred the boundaries between truth and illusion, between life and death. He could feel the drift into another world where the laws of physics no longer existed. Every night, I start to feel the tension in my body before entering the office. Even though I tried to rebuild a peaceful workspace, the claustrophobic feeling was still present. Even when I tried to push the strange thoughts about the statue out of my head, the air seemed to be compressed, tightly wrapped around me. With every breath I could clearly feel the presence of something beyond human understanding. The clown has begun to change. The changes were small but unmistakable, as if it was alive, observing me. Every time I saw it, that smile appeared in my sight, cold and mocking, not an expression of joy, but of subtle contempt. Every night, when the darkness covers me, I can't help but feel small movements around me. My eyes were haunted by it, and every time I looked at it, I found myself pulled into a trance, as if space and time were warping around that statue. One day, I realized I couldn't keep my sanity. Every item in the office becomes ambiguous, no longer as clear as before. Papers, pens, and other items seem to appear in places I don't remember putting them. The image reflected in the mirror is no longer mine. Every time I look at it, I see that distortion, as if my face is gradually changing. A cold wave ran down my spine, and I understood that it wasn't me who had changed, but reality that had gradually disintegrated around me. The statue's obsession becomes increasingly evident. Every time I entered the room, the weak fluorescent light seemed unable to illuminate the entire space, but only focused on the dark corners, where the clown statue was standing, with a distorted smile as if waiting for me. As I walked around it, I felt the space shrink, as if an invisible force was pulling me towards it. Every time I get close to it, I feel the coldness from its ceramic surface, like an invisible whisper calling me home. I couldn't ignore it, couldn't stop looking into those empty eyes. Gradually, I couldn't sleep. The nights are long and never end, and when I wake up, it feels like I've lost a part of my soul. Nightmares haunt me, the image of the statue always lingers in my dreams. One time, I dreamed I was walking into my office, and the statue had transformed into a creature, its eyes glowing red, so wide that it was no longer a ceramic object. It moved, slowly but surely, as if it was approaching me, waiting for me to come close. When I woke up, my heart was beating violently. I can't differentiate between dreams and reality anymore. The feeling of something watching me in the room made me unable to bear it any longer. Sometimes, when I sit at work, I hear that laughter, intermittent, vague laughter from the darkness. It didn't come from the statue, but I could feel it clearly, as if it was penetrating every cell in my body. The more I tried to act normal, the more I felt like I was sinking into the abyss. One night, when I couldn't take it anymore, I decided to deal with it all. I can't hide forever. I picked up the clown statue, holding in my hands the object that had now become a symbol of unspeakable fear. But when I lifted it up, I felt an invisible force coming at me, pushing it back. A heavy and overwhelming feeling made it almost impossible for me to move. I couldn't put it down, no matter how hard I tried. And when I looked into the statue's eyes, I understood that it was not an inanimate object. The statue is not just an ancient work of art, but a door that opens to another reality, where madness and darkness constantly haunt. And when I looked at that twisted smile, I realized that I could no longer escape it. I opened that door, and now, there's no turning back. As I locked the door, a strange feeling of guilt filled my mind. As if I had done something wrong, an action that could not be undone. At that moment, I couldn't escape the feeling that that statue was not just an inanimate object, but an entity with power beyond anything I could understand. Asking myself if I had acted too hastily, I exited the warehouse, still clutching the steering wheel, my eyes constantly scanning the rearview mirror. But nothing. The feeling that I had escaped that presence forever was just an illusion. My mind was constantly racing with thoughts of what I had done, the strange signs I had experienced, the silent laughter and the marks I could not explain. In the days that followed, even though I left the statue behind, I couldn't escape the feeling that it was still following me, waiting somewhere in the dark. Every time I think about the statue, a chill runs down my spine. Even though I put it away, the fear did not leave me. During quiet nights, I began to hear footsteps, small noises as if someone was moving in the house. My mind kept spinning with memories, the feeling that the statue had not yet abandoned me, that it was waiting for the moment to return. I don't dare step into the warehouse again. Every time I think about it, my heart tightens, as if something is still chasing me. I dare not allow myself to think that it has been left behind forever. The strange feeling of its presence still could not be dispelled. Every time night comes, I get restless, feeling invisible eyes watching me from the darkness. I cannot separate myself from that past, and I cannot escape the obsession that the clown statue brings. Day after day, I told myself that I was free from that obsession. But deep down, I understand that I can never truly escape it. Nothing can erase the impression the statue left on me. I began to feel that the statue was strangely attached to me, that my curiosity had awakened an uncontrollable force. In the end, I realized that what I had done was not to erase its presence, but only a form of temporary escape. Strange knocking sounds and markings continued to appear in my house, and I couldn't help but feel that I was slowly losing control. Fear paralyzed all my senses, causing me to live in endless confusion. And then one night, when I thought I could finally sleep peacefully, a laugh rang out in the quiet space. It started softly, then grew louder and louder, taunting me as if to confirm that I couldn't escape it. I woke up with a start, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw myself, but my face, my expressions, all became distorted, as if something had possessed me. What happens when you cannot escape the fear that you have awakened? I don't know if I can stay rational any longer, but I do know that the price of curiosity is a never-ending nightmare. The statue, or perhaps what it represents, has stuck with me, and I have had no choice but to accept that its presence will forever be a part of my life. But the more I tried to push that thought out of my head, the tighter it wound around me, an invisible string that became tighter and tighter. Every morning, when the first light passes through the crack in the door, I feel invisible fingers touching my mind, reminding me of that smile. And even though I told myself it was just a piece of pottery, I knew deep down, the object wasn't that simple. It became a part of me, a presence that couldn't be removed, even when I tried to leave it. A few weeks later, a small event broke through the wall of self-deception I had built. One day while I was cleaning in the office, I accidentally discovered a small sticky note, stuck on the underside of my desk, something I definitely never put there. When I looked closer, it only had one short sentence: "The clown is still there." I stood there stunned, those words seemed like a warning. A cold feeling invaded my body as I looked at the statue. It's still standing there on my bookshelf, but this time it's not standing still. Its arm had moved slightly, as if pointing directly at me, as if a reminder, a message was waiting. Its look was no longer a normal grin, but a deep, haunting sneer. I cannot continue to live in this delusion. Fear has taken away my ability to work, my ability to maintain normal relationships. Even work meetings now become battles with one's own obsessions. I cannot share this fear with anyone. No one can understand the pain of being constantly monitored by an inanimate object. Finally, I decided to face the truth. One evening, when all the lights in the house had gone out, I walked into the office, where the statue stood silently, looking at me as if I were part of its game. I don't know if I have the strength to completely erase it, but I know I can't continue living like this. Holding the statue, I closed my eyes and prayed in my heart, as if hoping it would be the last time I had to face this. But when I opened my eyes, the statue was still standing there. Don't move. Don't laugh. There was only eternal silence, lingering as if it were waiting for me to become self-aware. Its silence is not the end. It is an invitation, an affirmation that the story is not over yet. And in that moment, I realized that I couldn't escape it. Something had risen from the darkness, still alive and still alive, waiting until I was ready to accept the truth. Ultimately, the darkness of the statue took over my life. And I know I can't leave it. But the next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling. Everything in the room was normal, but there was something in the air that made me restless, as if this space no longer belonged to me. When I got out of bed and looked in the corner, where the armchair still sat, a feeling of anxiety came over me, like when you realize there's someone standing right behind you without you noticing. By evening, that feeling returned. Even though I tried to forget about the chair, every time I passed the corner of the room, it silently drew me towards it. At first, I convinced myself that it was just sensitivity due to having just moved to this place, but the uncomfortable feeling in my heart became increasingly undeniable. I knew I had to face it, and even though I tried to ignore it, I couldn't help but feel like that chair was watching me. One evening, when I couldn't stand it anymore, I decided to move it. I stood facing it, my hands sweating, my palms damp. But as soon as I stepped forward to move the chair, a sudden cold feeling spread throughout my body. As if there was something stopping me. A soft hiss sounded when I touched the back of the chair. My heart beat fast, and just as I was about to turn it away, a very small but clear noise came from underneath the chair. It was as if someone, an invisible presence, was sitting lurking in the darkness of that chair. I quickly backed away, my chest feeling heavy. The darkness in the corner of the room became thick, as if the space itself had changed, no longer a safe room. That feeling stayed with me all night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the chair creak, the groan of old wood, as if something was moving in the darkness. I can't sleep. All night, I just lay awake, trying to push back the fear spreading in my heart. The next morning, I couldn't stand it anymore. I decided to get rid of the chair, but when I returned to the room, I found the chair still sitting there, in the same position. It's strange, I remember moving it, but can't remember when or how it got back in place. From then on, I didn't dare stay in the room at night anymore. Every evening, I always found an excuse not to sleep there, and I started spending time in another room. But even though I tried to stay away from the chair, it still haunted me. Its hollow eyes still watch me in the darkness, and its smile, which has never subsided, always taunts me in my dreams. Gradually, I realized that this chair was not just an inanimate object. It is a reminder. A presence was waiting, and it knew I had tried to run away from it. Part of me feels like I can't avoid it, like a door has opened, and can't be closed anymore. When I turned on the light, I found the room completely empty, nothing but dark corners and the armchair there, quiet and lifeless. But fear still hangs in the air, a feeling as thick as a dark cloud. It felt like I had seen something too horrifying to accept, as if everything around me was changing in a way I couldn't explain. Part of me wondered if I was being sucked into a vortex of my own fear, or if there was actually something in this house going on that I hadn't yet fully discovered. That night, I heard familiar noises, gentle creaks from the bedroom, as if someone was walking, gliding across the floor, but when I checked, there was nothing but eternal silence. However, it cannot be denied that the feeling of being watched is getting stronger. When I lay in bed, my eyes couldn't leave the chair. Even though I knew it was just an old piece of furniture, its presence still challenged me, making me feel like there was some force lurking in the darkness. That feeling is not limited to the room I'm in. Every time I passed through the hallway, I felt the invisible gaze of the armchair, as if it were watching me from afar. I started avoiding looking at reflective surfaces, afraid that I would see something moving in the dark again, even though I knew it couldn't possibly be there. Every sound of wind blowing through the window startled me, every shadow in the house seemed to become a sign of danger. In times of loneliness, I wonder if this is just the result of fatigue, or if there is something truly inexplicable that is plaguing me. I closed the bedroom door, but the darkness was still waiting, as if it had seeped into every wall. Maybe it was a combination of inescapable anxiety and a bit of superstition that made me unable to escape the feeling that something was haunting this house. Every night, before falling asleep, I have to breathe deeply, trying to push those images out of my mind. But when I close my eyes, I see the image of an armchair, a chair that always stands still in the darkness, as if ready to move at any moment. And then, long nights passed, I no longer knew what was real and what was an illusion. Fear has become a part of me, and maybe, it's something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. With every step I took towards the back door, the chair seemed to have an invisible force, seemingly wanting to fight against me. It was heavier than I expected, not physically but feelingly, as if something was holding it tightly. I pulled it out of the house, feeling its faint presence with every step I took. That feeling overwhelmed me once again, that look, that smile, which now felt like a haunting sign of an irrevocable deal. As I placed the chair on the ground in the backyard, I looked at it again, my heart pounding. A cold feeling ran down my spine as the last sunlight shone down on it, but the surrounding air remained thick as if the darkness had not completely let go. I don't hesitate anymore. I went into the house, took a hammer and decided to smash it. Every hit on the chair was like an echo echoing in my mind. The piece of wood crumbled under my strength, but when I saw the fabric being torn apart, something strange happened. The shattered shadows seemed to fall out from within, twist and fly out, like vivid images. They suddenly disappeared when I looked closely. The feeling of heaviness still sticks with me. Even though the chair was no longer intact, I felt like something had been released from it, something invisible but still clearly present in the air. I stepped back, panting and unable to shake the feeling that something was following me. The silence was overwhelming, thick and made the space oppressive. I stood there for a long moment, only to see the chair disappear from view, as if what I had broken was just a small part of something bigger than I could have imagined. I don't know why, but I feel like I've entered something huge, a spiral that I can't escape from. When I returned to the house, silence had returned. But I know it's just a break. The feeling of being watched never left me. I could feel it even more clearly in this new space, as if the house, the objects, all of this, had gathered an inexplicable presence. And I can't forget the chair, the shadows that I'm sure are still in this space, right in my room. I tried to chase them away, but now I know that this is not the end. We cannot escape the past, no matter how hard we try. Even when the chair is gone, a part of it stays with me, lingering like a ghost that cannot be exorcised. And maybe, in a moment, it will return. My head spun as I looked into the mirror, a strange feeling spreading through me, as if it were not just a mere reflection but another door, a passage to things that could not be seen. The details of the grimacing face, swirling leaves and arching snake seemed to change in the dim light of the room. My eyes couldn't take my eyes off the mirror, it sucked me in, even though my mind protested. It felt like something was looking back at me from inside. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just an old mirror with strange patterns. But each time I turned to look, the mirror reflected more strangely, as if something was happening in it, shadowy silhouettes and indistinct shapes appearing and disappearing in the fading light. The more I looked, the more I felt surrounded by it, as if this mirror was reflecting another world, a world where things I didn't want to see were waiting. I touched the mirror, and it was cold, but not just cold in the way that metal or glass can be cold. It had a special feeling, a heavy feeling. One could almost feel the movement in the surrounding air. A cold wind blew past me, as if the mirror had breathed out a murky wave. I pulled my hand back, feeling a wave of fear flow through me. Suddenly, a strong wind blew through the room, moving the curtains, creating an eerie sound when the curtain fabric touched the wall. I turned back to look at the mirror, and at that moment, I thought I saw a shadow pass through it, a vague, indeterminate shape. That shadow seemed to be moving, dragging a cold wind from behind, making me shiver slightly. I can't stop, I can't turn away. It felt like an invisible force was pulling me closer to the mirror. I wanted to move closer, but a strange feeling stopped me, making me unable to continue. I was confused, scared, and suddenly, I realized I was standing too close to the mirror. A thought flashed in my head, but I couldn't express it in words. I could feel a movement in the room, a movement from behind the mirror. Isn't even the air thicker now? It felt like everything in the room was shrinking, pulling back toward that mirror. Yet, part of me couldn't resist moving closer. My eyes remained glued to the mirror, looking at the blurred images and constantly changing silhouettes. My heart was pounding, and every beat in my chest rang like a bell signaling impending doom. I could almost hear a faint whisper in the air, as if the mirror was calling to me. What should I do now? Can I escape this place, or has something started since I entered this place? In the dark night, that sound became clearer and clearer. The hissing sound was not a sound from the surrounding environment, but something deep within, as if the matter of the room itself was being forced to change. I listened, trying to distinguish between what was real and what was just a product of the paranoia of my weary mind. But, the more I listened, the stronger I felt that there was movement coming from the mirror. The feeling was not a movement of light or darkness, but a change in the air, as if the space around the mirror was shrinking, squeezing me into something inexplicable. I couldn't control it anymore. My eyes looked at the mirror again. Its outlines, dim in the thin moonlight, seemed to have a life of their own. They became clearer, as if the mirror was pushing itself away from its walls. I could feel it. There was something hidden behind the glass surface, something waiting, watching me, not just from the outside but also from the inside. I walked closer, but my steps were no longer as steady as before. With every step, I felt an invisible pressure pushing me towards the mirror, as if there was a strange pull pulling me back. When I touched the glass surface, I felt a cold air penetrate my skin. It was different from any cold I had ever known, as if this glass was not just a material but a part of another dimension. And then, again, I saw it, not in my reflection, but in the darkness inside the mirror. A shape, blurred but distinct, stood right behind me. I could feel that look, feel it penetrating through my skin, into the depths of my mind. It felt like being watched from a place I couldn't turn around to face, where any move I made was just an invitation for it to come closer. All my feelings became blurred and a coldness enveloped me. A soft noise, like a breath, sounded again, but this time I couldn't determine its origin. My hands trembled, and I suddenly realized that I was no longer standing in front of the mirror but had stepped back, my legs as if held by an invisible force. A thought occurred to me, a thought that I couldn't shake: it's not just a mirror. At that moment, the sound of the wind blew again, and this time, it felt like something real had come out from inside the mirror. Suddenly, the space in the room became heavy, as if I was standing in a gap between worlds, unable to escape, unable to stay. But as soon as I stepped back, the light went out. The room was filled with thick darkness, and I felt it, a presence. Not just a shadow in space, but a force waiting, wanting me to come back, wanting me to recognize it, wanting me to take another step so it could enter this world. I can't breathe anymore. The shadow in the mirror is smiling, not with its mouth, but with its silence, with its eternity. And when I turned around, I knew that this haunting was not over. I stood there, my hand stiff on the doorknob, the cold feeling seeping into each finger. My eyes never left the mirror, and in the dead silence of the room, I could feel its presence again. There was no discernible darkness, no strong movement, but I felt a subtle change in the air around me. A threat that cannot be seen, but is too powerful to deny. Step by step, I entered the room. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the silence, as if I was entering another space, a space that did not completely belong to me. At that moment, a gentle breeze blew through the room, causing the curtains to move. I turned around, and for a brief moment, I saw my reflection in the mirror, but it wasn't just me. Another shape, faint and shapeless, stood behind me. I turned around, my body stiff with panic, but there was no one behind me. Just empty walls. My face was drenched in sweat, my breathing was rapid. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, standing silently in the darkness, engulfing the space around me. Every time I look into the mirror, it reflects an invisible entity, a presence that gradually fills this space. Unable to hold back any longer, I walked to the mirror again, my hands shaking as I touched the cold frame. A cold feeling permeated my skin, an inexplicable feeling. Suddenly, the image in the mirror began to change, not to my reflection, but to another space, another room, dark and filled with a musty smell. I found myself standing there, facing a small window, in an empty room where there was only darkness and silence. A feeling of dizziness hit me. My eyes widened, my head spun, as if I was being pulled into a mirror, into another world, a space I couldn't escape. I quickly pulled my hand away from the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. But it was too late, the mirror was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was a door, and I was standing right in front of it, where the darkness was waiting quietly. I staggered out of the room, my heart pounding, and I couldn't stop, couldn't understand what was happening to me. All I know is I can't stay here anymore, can't face the mirror, can't face what has snuck into my mind. I need to get out of here, but I don't know if I can really get out of it. Every step I take, I feel that shadow is still following me, still silently watching me from behind. As I stepped outside, the dim glow of streetlights illuminated the quiet streets. The night air was cold and I could feel its stillness all around me. But inside me, there was a worry that couldn't be expressed in words. I don't know what I will find when I return to that room, and whether the mirror's haunting will continue to haunt me. There is only one thing I know for sure, there are things that cannot be explained, things that will stay with you, forever. But another part of me, the part one couldn't deny, was imbued with a deep fear, a feeling that I wasn't just witnessing a hallucination, but that I had actually touched something I couldn't explain. Something followed me, attached to my mind and soul like an inseparable shadow. A horror that cannot be avoided, cannot be shaken off. As I stopped at the intersection, the pale yellow light from the streetlights reflecting on the windshield, I felt that presence again, like a shadow, hovering around me. I closed my eyes, trying to calm myself, but only became more aware of the tension, the whispers that were inaudible but felt. And then I realized, it wasn't just a mirror. It's not just distorted reflections in that space. It is something that has penetrated into me, into my mind, lurking in every thought, in every moment I try to escape it. I can't get out. Every time I think I've escaped it, it greets me in a new form, a new, deeper way. When I looked out the taxi window, the streetlights reflected my face. And in that moment, I saw, not me, but an image of someone else. A shadow behind me, not mine, but clearly there, faint in the reflection. I closed my eyes again, but couldn't stop thinking about it. Wherever I go, I feel it clinging to me, even when I don't see it, even when I can't touch it. The cold feeling of it, the quiet but empty presence. When I finally arrived at my new hostel, I tried to get things back to normal. I wanted to forget what happened, but even in the quiet of my new room, I still felt it. There was always a silent observation, as if I was in a world that was not my own. There's no escaping that darkness, there's no forgetting it, and I wonder if this horror is truly over or just the beginning of a new obsession, a never-ending cycle. A vague sense of dislocation swept over me like a cold wave. My mind couldn't accept what was happening. I looked at the elevator, surprised, as if it had taken me back to where I had just stepped out. Its door closed behind me smoothly, but the feeling of suspense was overwhelming. I blinked again, confused, wondering if this was a trick of the light or if I was actually stuck in a dimensional loop. I tried to breathe deeply to dispel the fear, but my heart beat faster, a feeling of suffocation covering my chest. Time seemed to last forever. I turned around and looked into the dim hallway, exactly the same as the one I had just passed through. Everything seems a reflection, a strange play of time and space. Even though I knew I had gone down to the S3 floor, everything around me was no different from the G floor I had just left. My steps were light on the polished tile floor, each step was like a strong blow to the terrifying silence of this space. I stood there, motionless, waiting for a sign, a sound. The lights on the ceiling flickered, creating a heavy, eerie atmosphere. And then, from somewhere in the darkness, I heard a soft laugh. A faint sound, as if a puppet was whispering from behind the mysterious curtain of space. Sweat ran down my forehead as I realized that I wasn't the only one in this room. Something was watching me, right in the darkness, right in the corners I couldn't see. My eyes were glued to the wall in front of me. I began to feel that presence. It was creeping into every corner of my mind, something that had long existed in the darkness. I turned around, feeling the inexplicable movement in the air. The elevator worked strangely again, and then, as if from a nightmare, I saw a shadow flash in the corner of my vision. I couldn't see clearly, but a cold and numb feeling spread from the tips of my toes to the top of my head. I don't know if I can run away. The feeling has returned, as if I have entered a vicious cycle with no way out. I quickly pressed the elevator button, hoping to escape this strange room. But the door just opened again, revealing an endless dark hallway, with no way out. That empty space seemed endless, and I knew I couldn't escape. My breath caught in my throat, I couldn't move. As I looked into that hallway, I realized that I was not just facing what I had seen, but something more. A reminder of things that should not be seen, things that should not exist in the human eye. And now, they are back, not just in a space but also in my mind. I took a deep breath, but the air in the hallway was still heavy and stuffy. Faint dim light bulbs hang from the ceiling, the light is weak as if afraid to illuminate this place for a long time. Every step I took echoed on the cold concrete floor, it felt like every sound was bouncing off the empty walls. Something inside me felt the loneliness seeping into every hidden corner of this space. I looked around, tense, but there was nothing of note, except the thick walls and old pipes. However, the feeling of something wrong still lingered in the air, as if something was waiting for me, lurking in the darkness. I know, there's no reason to feel scared, but part of me can't help but feel as if I'm being watched. I walked towards the end of the hallway, where old doors opened, leading to deserted rooms of unknown purpose. A slightly open door ahead caught my attention. I got closer, but when I put my hand on the door handle, I felt a cold wind whistling through the crack, followed by a strange sound, as if someone was breathing in my ear. The cold from inside the hallway made me feel nauseous. I tried to stay calm, but an uneasy feeling rose in my heart. I opened the door and entered. Inside is a small, empty room, except for an old chair. The familiar feeling made me stop immediately. This chair, although not identical to the chair in the inn, had a similar appearance and wear. It looked like an object that could not be missed. An eerie sound rang out again, a gentle scratching sound from somewhere unknown. But I can't figure out what it is. All I know is there's something wrong here. I couldn't do anything but stare at the chair. Its feeling, its strange appeal made me unable to take my eyes off it. I stepped closer, the light from the weak fluorescent lights created a dim space. My hands trembled as I placed my fingers on the chair. It was colder than I expected, so cold that my skin felt frozen. Suddenly, a loud noise startled me, and the door behind me suddenly slammed shut. My heart was pounding. I turned around and saw only a quiet room. There was no one, nothing, except a wave of fear rising within me. The feeling of someone following me became more and more clear. The space around me felt like it was suffocating my every breath. I stood there, not daring to move, feeling as if I had entered a space where time and space were no longer right. Something has changed within me, in this space. I turned around and ran out of the room, trying to find a way out again. But each step I took echoed so loudly in the empty space that I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. When I left the building, a strange feeling followed me throughout the journey. Something idly followed me, waiting, as if it wasn't over yet. It was difficult to ease the feeling of fear engraved within me. Even though everything on the outside seemed to be back to normal, the terror still haunted me. The strange images and creepy sounds still piled up in my mind, as if they had spread into my body, resurfacing every time I closed my eyes. Every time I turned my head to look in the rearview mirror, I had the feeling that something was watching me from behind. My eyes automatically scanned the hidden corners, checking to see if anyone was sneaking into the darkness outside. But nothing. There was only night, silent and endless. I hit the gas and kept driving, but it felt like I was escaping something inescapable. Even though I was miles away from that parking lot, I still felt a presence constantly following me. And there's one thought I can't get out of my head: will everything I've just experienced really end? Have those faint figures retreated, or are they just waiting for another chance to return, once again threatening me in the darkness? Anyway, I can't live in this obsession forever. I needed something to take my mind off that spiral. But it seems that this space, this air, they have been imbued with something that cannot be dispelled. The neon light on the street now became a reminder of what I had been through, adding to the feeling of being lost, as if this world had never been mine. I promised myself I would leave those strange things, but I could never completely erase the memory of that chair, of those reflections. Something inside me still feels the weight of that presence, still sees traces of it in the most ordinary moments. In the long run, I understand that some encounters never truly end. Even after we leave, they will always find a way to return, as part of an indelible memory. What I have encountered, what I have experienced, they will still follow me throughout this life, like a never-ending nightmare. I wasn't sure what to expect from the conversation, but I knew I couldn't continue living in this confusion. I had to find an explanation, a reasonable explanation for what had happened. I met the building's maintenance supervisor late one afternoon, when the building was almost quiet, with only the sigh of air conditioning and the echo of public equipment. He was an older man, with gray hair and wrinkles around his eyes. His gait was slow, as if each step carried a long history. I hesitated for a moment, not knowing where to start. But finally, I said, "Has anything changed recently? Have there been any problems with the elevators and systems in the building?" He looked at me intently, his eyes brightening a little, as if he knew better what I was thinking. "The elevator? There's never been a problem," he replied, his voice even but firm. "However, this building has a long history. Things have changed a lot over the years, but some things remain the same." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What did you say?" I asked, almost whispering. "Night workers can feel it," he said, his voice becoming low and steady, as if he were talking about something he had known for too long. "Some places in this building have an energy that's not easily explained. Some people call it a presence. But I wouldn't say that's what you're looking for. Just, don't let it take you over." I looked at him, a feeling of confusion rising within me, as if I had found an important piece of the puzzle, but couldn't quite understand it. "You said presence. What does that mean?" He just looked at me, not answering right away. After a long moment, he shrugged slightly. "You'll understand, when the time comes." Then he turned away, without any further explanation. I stood there, my mind reeling with chaotic thoughts. This building, what I've been through, it's all like a never-ending nightmare. That feeling still sticks with me. It has become a part of me, hard to shake off. Reality and mystery seemed to blend together, as if the place itself was becoming a living entity, watching and waiting. Every step in this building now feels like a confrontation with something intangible, inexplicable. What I have experienced is not the end, but a part of a long and ambiguous journey, where shadows still beckon from behind familiar walls. Now, every time I looked at the walls of the building, a cold feeling, as if things lurking in the dark were still watching me, arose within me. The small cracks on the wall, the dim lights, all seemed to contain stories that I didn't want to know. Every step through the hallway was filled with anxiety, as if the reality of where I lived was just a thin shell, easily torn by shadows that I couldn't see but clearly felt. I no longer felt comfortable anywhere as those shadows watched, beckoning me from behind walls I couldn't break down. Sometimes I wonder, is everything I've been through just a psychological crisis, or is there something deeper, more obscure, gnawing at my reality? That feeling still sticks with me, no matter what I try, and it won't let me go, like an eternal ghost. Day by day, I continued with my life, but I couldn't completely get rid of those strange images and feelings. In my dreams, I still see myself walking down those gloomy hallways, the elevator taking me into a space with no escape. Every time I wake up, cold sweat pours down my spine, and I can't help but wonder if I've escaped those shadows, or if they will continue to follow me forever. Part of me still fears that that building, with all its mysteries, is still with me. Every time I look into the mirrors, into the darkness within them, I can't help but feel like there's something out there, watching, waiting. Strange silhouettes, inexplicable movements, still lurk in every dim light, as if they were just waiting for me again. Everything in the room was disturbed, as if a storm had passed, but there were no signs of life. I stood still for a moment, a strange and eerie feeling engulfing me. Even though the room was still empty, I couldn't escape the feeling that it had seen more than I could understand. The window curtain dangled, as if it had been hastily removed, the night wind blew past, causing it to hiss. Something heavy, almost pressing on my chest, as if this house was protesting my presence. Suddenly, I heard a gentle rustling sound coming from the corner of the room, where I had just scanned. My heart pounded, and I turned around quickly, panicked eyes searching for any sign of movement. It's just darkness, but it's the silence now that makes everything scarier. I couldn't find a reason for this feeling on my own. Why do I feel like I'm being watched, even though there's no one else in the room? I bit my lip, telling myself it was just fatigue, but I couldn't shake that strange feeling. All the little sounds, the soft breathing, the fleeting noises, brought an inexplicable uneasiness. I walked out of the room, trying to find answers elsewhere in the house, but the air was still heavy and threatening as if the house itself was tightening around me. But every night, the darkness comes with an unbearable weight. I started counting the seconds until the clock passed midnight, when the unusual noises began. My bedroom door, although locked tightly, opened little by little in the late hours of the night, creaking as if someone from the darkness was trying to get in. The tension in my chest felt like a stretched string, growing tighter every night. I decided I couldn't continue like this. I can't just sit back and hope that everything will go away. The feeling of oppression, frustration, and suspicion about what was really going on in this house made me unable to let go. Even when I tried to find reasons, rationalize things, those nights never stopped. Every effort only increased my fear. Finally, one night, I decided to climb upstairs, despite the fear that rose like a crashing wave. I can't ignore it anymore. I had to know exactly what was going on in that room. My heart was pounding as I set foot on each flight of stairs. Every step felt like I was moving towards something inevitable, a confrontation I could no longer avoid. As I stood in front of the bedroom door, I heard a soft hiss. The door opened again, this time not because of the wind or any other logical reason. A cold breeze blew through, bringing with it a fishy, damp smell. I took a deep breath, trying to keep myself from shivering. But as I walked in, I couldn't help but feel that presence, something lurking in the shadows, watching me from behind the wall. I looked around the room. Everything was quiet, but the air was thick and choking, and I could clearly feel the tension in the space. At that moment, a dark shadow passed through the corner of the room. It blurred and changed shape when I looked at it, as if it did not belong to this world. My eyes opened wide, but there was only darkness and obscurity before me. I quickly turned around, my heart felt like it had fallen out of my chest. Behind me, a hissing sound came from the corners of the house, a sigh, not mine, but as if it were echoing in my own mind. I ran down the stairs, but fear still followed me, as if this house was holding me back, not letting me go. The next morning, I decided that I couldn't stay here any longer. But as I was about to leave, I realized something strange. I couldn't find my keys. I checked every corner, every bag, every place I had left it, but it was gone. Like a psychological game, everything I believed in was gradually disappearing, and this house seemed to be playing a strange joke with me. Then I saw the key, sitting on the old table in the living room, but I didn't put it there. It was like someone had invited me back, as if this house was waiting for me again, to continue a story I couldn't understand. That feeling, the feeling that I couldn't clearly describe, once again rose within me. A reminder that some things can never escape the darkness. I walked back into the hallway, trying to calm my fears. Part of me wanted to leave the house immediately, but I couldn't. My reason told me that it was just the strange imagination of someone living in an old house, but that feeling, that presence, did not allow me to leave. I turned around and looked in the bathroom mirror, trying to face myself. But that reflection itself, there was something strange about it. The features of my face became blurred in the dim light, as if I wasn't me, or maybe, I was seeing myself from another angle, from another reality. That feeling didn't go away, making me even more scared. Amid the dim light of the house, I felt like I had been taken into a space with no way out. Even though I know I'm still standing here, a part of me can't escape the feeling that a part of this home has been taken away, another part of me is buried somewhere within these walls, waiting to return. I cannot understand what happened. I wondered if I was losing my mind, but every time I thought about that event, I felt a strange coldness, an inexplicable feeling of being watched. The whole next day passed in a chaos of my mind, anxious emotions hovering everywhere, unable to dispel. I didn't dare return to the house, didn't dare set foot on that second floor again. But I still know that no matter how I hide, the darkness of this house will not let me go easily. I don't know if I will find a solution to this monstrosity. But I understand that I cannot continue to live in this fear, that I cannot forever keep myself in such a prolonged state of stress. Let's try again to face what happened. I returned to the house, determined to see it clearly, to face what was haunting me. However, every step in the long hallway, every small noise around me made me nervous, feeling like someone was in the dark. And I realized that, in the stuffy space of the house, something had entered me, had taken over my mind. Not an object, not a person, but an invisible presence, just waiting when I let my guard down to come back again and invade. And I understand that maybe I'm not the only one who feels that way. It's just that no one can clearly talk about it, even if they feel it. That feeling, seemingly born from this house itself, is an integral part of it. As I stood next to the door, a feeling of hesitation spread throughout my body, as if I had fallen into a space from which I could not escape. Every wall around me seemed to trap me, not allowing me to step back. I stared at the door, wondering if the knocks would come again or not. But I also knew that, once I entered this house, I could not simply leave without understanding it, about myself. Part of me hopes that the horrors will end, but I also cannot escape the fact that sometimes, we cannot escape the darkness that follows us, no matter how hard we try. And this house, with its unsolved secrets, will always exist like a ghost in my mind. The night came oppressively, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark and gloomy was waiting for me. The afternoon light faded as if it was avoiding me. Even though I walked out of that house, some part of me knew that I couldn't escape the memories that had haunted me for so long. That feeling still sticks with me, like a ghost that never really left. Every step I take outside is like stepping out of a nightmare, but what I leave behind is not faded. I realize that the truth cannot always be hidden, and sometimes, the hauntings in the dark can find a way to follow you, no matter where you run. I don't know if I will return to that house again. But I know that those shadows will always linger in my mind, etched into my memories like wounds that cannot be healed. The knocks on the door, the strange changes in the space, and the dark, smoky figure will still follow me, no matter how hard I try to forget. And I wonder if there are things that reason cannot explain, things that we can only feel, and that will forever haunt us, no matter how much we seek liberation. The doors we close sometimes open up to something else, a darkness that cannot be avoided. That feeling kept rising, as if the darkness of late nights was not just the blackness of the universe, but an invisible aliveness, waiting, watching over me. I could feel something existing just beneath the mist of the night sky, and that feeling was no longer a vague fear, but a real presence, strange and indifferent. Those nights, even though I sat quietly in my room, it still felt as if there was something outside the window, out of my sight, waiting for a signal from me. The shadows of the oak tree were now no longer just the still shapes of the branches, but something that could step out of the darkness, following me like a wolf in the night. From the day that wolf statue was placed in the garden, my life changed. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I had the feeling that every time I turned to look at it, the wolf's eyes seemed to become sharper. As the night progressed, its shape became clearer, and I couldn't help but feel as if the wolf was not simply a work of art, but something alive, capable of seeing my every move. On rainy nights, when the wind whistles through the treetops, I feel like someone, or something, is watching me from the darkness. Every strange noise startled me, as if there was a nearby presence watching my every move. I started to stay away from the garden, avoiding looking at the statue, not daring to face the heavy feeling it brought. Although I tried to convince myself that these were just the strange thoughts of someone living alone for so long, deep down, I felt that there was something else lurking, waiting. Every day, I feel the tension in the air increasing. Something invisible was always present, like a ghost constantly watching my every move. The feeling of silent surveillance grew, to the point where I couldn't help but feel the turmoil in my own mind. Am I falling into a trap, or am I facing something deeper, an invisible connection that I cannot break? Even though I left that house behind, I left behind all my fears, but I couldn't stop thinking about the wolf, about that statue. And I can't help but feel that, no matter where I am, it will always be there, a silent invitation, a never-ending song in the darkness. Light suddenly swept through the darkness, but there was nothing. The oak tree stood firmly, with no movement other than the slender branches and leaves rising in the wind. I stood there, breathing rapidly, my heart beating loudly in my chest. That night, there was nothing but eerie silence, filling the void in space as if everything was waiting for something. But as soon as I closed the door, a very strange feeling overwhelmed me. It felt like someone was standing behind me. I turned around quickly, but there was still nothing but pitch darkness surrounding the small house. My steps were quiet, but my mind kept screaming that something was lurking in that darkness. I couldn't help but think of the wolf statue, which had been placed by the oak tree. The flashlight's light illuminated its image, and I swear that, even for just a brief moment, the wolf's eyes seemed to move. The strange reflections of light made me feel like it was no longer a lifeless piece of metal. It's watching me. And when I turned my back, I felt like it continued to watch my every step. The following nights became long. I couldn't sleep, couldn't rest, couldn't stop looking at the oak tree where that black wolf stood, silently waiting. I asked myself if I was falling into a loop, a vicious cycle of obsession and fear. Am I starting to believe in the existence of something I can't explain? And then, one night, when I woke up in the middle of a nightmare, I heard rustling outside the window. I opened my eyes in the darkness, my heart pounding. I closed my eyes and heard a soft howl, very far away, but also very close. I know that I can't go on living like this anymore, but I can't leave, I can't escape these images, these sounds, these feelings. I looked back and realized that I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, haunted by the wolf. It is a silent reminder that the truth can never stay hidden forever. Something has left, but maybe it's just waiting for the moment to return. I closed my eyes, feeling the heat radiating from the statue, as if it were alive, as if an invisible force was flowing through the metal. With each passing second, I felt a strange vibration in my body, as if something was changing in the air around me. I can't explain this feeling, but it makes me feel that I'm not facing an inanimate object. Suddenly, I heard a light sigh, like a soft breath ringing near my ear. I turned around, but there was no one. Only the treetops rustled, and the wolf statue still stood there, its silver eyes reflecting in the fading light. My breath caught in my throat, and I quickly stood up, taking a step back. As I walked away from the statue, my anxiety increased. I can't leave this behind. The statue, which I had considered a lifeless object, now felt like a mark, a presence in my life that I couldn't get rid of. And every time I leave, I feel like something is pulling me back. Darkness surrounded me, and I stood there, trying not to let the fear overwhelm me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop feeling that the statue was still watching me, following my every move. It's like a part of this space, and it never leaves. It seemed that that presence did not only exist in this physical world but had penetrated different layers of space, pulling me into a universe that I could not understand. I began to understand that I might not be able to escape it. No matter how much you leave, no matter how many times you change, this obsession will continue. One day, I may have to return to face something I cannot explain. But do I have the strength to do so, or will I be consumed by it like I feel every time I near that statue? The cool feeling of the water in my throat eased my panic, but it couldn't dispel the sudden fear that overcame me. My hands were still shaking, and my heart was pounding as if I was still running from something incomprehensible. I looked into the mirror in the store, trying to see myself in the pale light, but my reflection only made me feel alienated. The man in the mirror looked at me, his eyes wide open, unnatural light reflected in them. I held the water bottle, but couldn't concentrate. The howls, the stealthy footsteps, and those silver eyes still haunt me, echoing in my mind. I wondered if I was truly free of something, or was it all just the clinging of a tired, confused mind? Paranoia had become a part of me, confusing the real with the imaginary, making it difficult to distinguish the line between inexplicable anxiety and real menace. I don't know what to do next. Recent days have passed in a fog of anxiety and stress. I avoided talking to others about what happened, because I knew they would just think I was overwhelmed. But there was a part of me, an indelible part, that was screaming that something very bad was watching me. I couldn't shake that feeling, even when I was in an unfamiliar convenience store, and the country road seemed never-ending. I returned to my car, looked in the rearview mirror again, but this time I saw nothing but empty space behind me. I took a deep breath, trying to regain control. Step by step, I drove out of the parking lot, deciding that no matter what was watching me, I would try to live on. But the truth is, I know that I can't run forever. There was something there, in the darkness of the house, waiting. Still unable to escape that heavy feeling, I continued to drive forward, without destination, just to escape the horrifying feelings that gnawed at my mind every day. Something inside me knew I would have to turn back, even though I didn't want to. And if I do, will I have the strength to face it again? I couldn't escape that strange feeling, a presence that was always there, almost invisible but clear in every wave of air around me. No matter how hard I try to explain it, I can't erase it from my mind. Every gust of wind, every rustle of leaves, makes me so sensitive that it feels like something is watching my every move. I feel like I live in a world where everything can change in the blink of an eye, amidst unexplainable darkness. Every morning when I wake up, I try to get rid of that feeling of insecurity. I looked through the window, trying to find peace from the oak tree that had stood for a century. But even when I couldn't see anything, I knew it was there. Its silence seemed to hold a dark secret that I could never understand. Still, I couldn't help but feel an inseparable connection between me and this house, a presence that couldn't be dismissed. When the statue was taken away, I thought I had erased it, but the truth is that it had become a part of me, connecting me with a deep fear that I could not separate. Even though I tried to leave and temporarily escape that fear, I could not forget that feeling, the feeling that something that did not belong to this world was still here, a shadow that I could not see but always felt, a reminder of the thinness between reality and what seemed to be just an illusion. Perhaps, this fear will always follow me, as an inseparable part of life. And perhaps, I will never know whether those figures are just hallucinations, or if they really exist, lurking in the darkness, waiting for a moment to return. I tried to stay calm, convincing myself that this was just part of the building's natural aging. But as the flashing lights resumed and the quiet sounds gradually turned into strange and confusing noises, I couldn't help but feel a heavy feeling in my chest. It was not just a technical problem anymore, but a presence, an invisible force that was watching my every move in that quiet space. The feeling of fear has gradually replaced the initial anxiety. I started to doubt myself. Are the sounds I hear just the fatigue of my ears, or is there something else going on in this building that I can't understand? The feeling lasted, and as the lights continued to make small explosions, I felt a tension in the air, like something was about to break. I tried leaving the apartment, going outside, but everything seemed to pull me back. It's like there's an invisible string connecting me to this space. Even though I tried to run away, that feeling still stuck with me, like an undeniable ghost. The lights continued to flicker, the static continued, and every night I listened to strange sounds that I couldn't explain. I don't know if I have become a part of this house, or if it has become a part of me. On long nights, the loneliness in the apartment becomes even more intense. Even though I tried to convince myself that they were hallucinations, that I was just stressed and sleep deprived, the air around me still felt wrong. This feeling as if something inexplicable was watching, invading my space, making it impossible for me to relax, unable to turn off the anxiety in my mind. Every little noise startled me. I wondered if there really was something in that darkness, or if my mind was simply constructing images to explain my fear. But those shadows, those cold feelings, those hissing sounds in the wall, they couldn't all be just imagination. I couldn't understand, but I also couldn't deny that there was a presence in this room, not in physical form, but an invisible force that made the space seem constantly tense. Really, I asked myself if I had the courage to face what was happening here, or if I was just stuck in a never-ending nightmare. That feeling, it couldn't simply be an electrical malfunction or temporary stress anymore. Even though I tried to find every reasonable reason, I felt something deeper was pulling me into the darkness of this very house. The blur between waking and sleeping has become a land of gloom. The moments when I was awake, clearly aware of reality, were gradually erased by strange dreams, shadows passing by like mist. It felt like I was no longer completely myself, but just a shadow lost in my own home, trapped in a vortex that could never end. I began to wonder if I could leave, if I could escape that shadow, that undeniable presence that imprisoned me in this space. But every time I think about leaving, I feel like an invisible hand is holding me back, as if something is calling me back, inescapably. On stressful nights, I realized that it wasn't just the devices, the lights, or the shadowy figures that were haunting me, but the space of this apartment. The walls seemed to breathe, the dark shadows in the corners seemed to move, gliding through every gap to watch me. And then, that feeling of extreme tension as if there was some force pulling the strings of everything around me. I began to slowly sink into a state I had no control over, between vague fear and endless dreams. It was as if what I was experiencing was not just a shock to reality but a vicious circle, where I could only escape from one obsession to another. Will I ever find peace? Or will I forever live in that shadow? The feeling of relief is only temporary. As soon as I locked the apartment door, I felt like I was giving up not just a place, but a part of myself. That apartment haunted me not only through strange sounds and flickering lights, but also with an intangible presence, like an invisible ghost always lurking in the air. Every step I take, every change, seems to be an attempt to cut the invisible thread that I cannot escape. Fear not only existed within the walls of that apartment, but also stuck to me like a scar, a psychological mark that I could not erase. Even though I left, I still felt like something was pursuing me, as if that presence wasn't just confined to dark rooms, but had permeated every cell of me. As I sat back in the small hotel room, silence filled the air. Everything seemed normal, but the feeling of being watched still haunted me. I couldn't understand why, even though this room didn't have strange phenomena like the previous apartment, I still felt tense, as if someone was standing behind me, silently watching me. Perhaps, when we face the inexplicable, fear exists not only in reality, but also in uncertainty itself, in those moments when reason cannot grasp what is real and what is just imagination. And perhaps, this fear does not come from specific places, but from the very fear that I cannot get rid of. The feeling of uncertainty, the constant tension, was like a ghost surrounding my mind. Every time I tried to reach a safer place, a strange feeling arose within me, as if something had been awakened in hidden corners that I could not reach. And even after I left the apartment, the fear continued to follow me like a nagging memory, like a nightmare that hadn't stopped. The hotel room did not help me escape that stress. The lights were bright, but I couldn't shake the image of the flickering light, the inexplicable noises in the darkness. I tried to imagine that I was living a normal life, but every now and then, the feeling that something was watching me came over me, making the space around me feel claustrophobic and threatening. Sometimes, no matter how hard I try to chase it away, I still can't stop the feeling that darkness is always behind me, where I can't see. The vague feeling of threat, of something unspeakable but very clear in the depths of my heart, made it impossible for me to live in peace. Every time the light flickered, every time I blinked, I felt like I had entered a space with no escape, where every sound, every shadow could carry another meaning, a warning that I couldn't explain. And now, on a long flight, I realized that that feeling still sticks with me. Even though I couldn't see it, even though there was nothing unusual around me, I could feel it. A clear sign that I was not just running away from a place but also giving up a part of myself, and that something I didn't fully understand was waiting ahead for me. In that dream, I stood quietly, watching my aunt from afar, but her presence in this space, where nothing was normal anymore, made my heart pound. Her smile was too wide, as if it was trying to pull me into something I couldn't understand. My aunt, in her old flight attendant uniform, is no longer the person I remember from the old days, but now she is like another entity, living in a space-time space, an invisible void that I cannot escape. As I tried to walk towards her, the plane's aisles seemed to stretch endlessly, as if pulling me into a bottomless pit. Strange noises, the rustling of worn-out chairs, the musty air in the cabin, all create an eerie picture, a world that is falling apart and decaying. But my aunt still stood there, unchanged, her smile still wide open, as if inviting me into an area I couldn't leave. I felt like my body couldn't move, but I couldn't escape her eyes. Those eyes showed no signs of fatigue or worry, only a strange steadfastness, as if she had surpassed all human laws. My aunt was a being, but not the person I knew. As she raised her hand towards me, I felt an invisible pull, as if every step I took towards her was a step into death, or something deeper, an inevitable end. My throat was tight, I couldn't utter a word, couldn't leave the path, couldn't protest. That feeling, between the cold of the rotting plane and my aunt's cold presence, made me feel like everything around me was shrinking, every object, every sound, was suffocated under the weight of this blurry time and space. The dream was like an attack on my reason, as if it was grasping me in its arms, pulling me into a place with no escape. And when I woke up, my heart was still beating fast, sweat soaked the back of my shirt. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just experienced an encounter not with a human being but with something beyond the world I knew. Every time I came back, the room was normal, but the cold feeling still stuck with me. Invisible winds and thin breaths in the air made it impossible for me to dispel my fear. It's strange, I can't help but feel that a part of my aunt is still somewhere, watching me. Every time the light of a lamp flickered, I was startled. The air in the room, always heavy, carried a weight that I couldn't explain. Those nights, I couldn't sleep, no matter how hard I tried to dispel the obsession by turning on the TV, or listening to music so loud that I wanted to drown out all the sounds in my head. But it still cannot be avoided. She is still present somewhere, her shadow is invisible but so clear in my mind. Chairs swayed in the dark room, and footsteps were light, almost inaudible, as if someone was walking down my hallway. At those times, I felt like I was locked in another world, where everything was gradually losing balance, and nothing was real. One morning, as I stood in front of the window, looking at the scenery outside, I suddenly realized a terrifying truth. My aunt is not the only person in my family who has the ability to pass through these invisible doors. I began to wonder if there was some parallel world where my loved ones still lived, a world that I couldn't see but still felt. The words my aunt once said now echo in my head. Never leave the sky, no matter what happens. The sky always protects your loved ones. But now, the sky is no longer a place where I feel safe. Fear has engraved a new belief in me, that something is still lurking, waiting for me from behind the sky I once loved. Maybe, I will never know clearly whether I am haunted by another world, something that does not belong to this world, or whether I am just fooling myself. But on dark nights, when the darkness subsides and I try to fall asleep, I still feel that presence, always there, watching over me, like a reminder that there are secrets that I have never fully discovered. I couldn't escape the feeling as if I had entered a living nightmare where time and space no longer had meaning. Even though it was this modern plane, I felt like I was in another world, a place where things were broken, gradually disintegrating, like in those strange dreams. In that moment, I noticed a flickering light in the cabin, and my aunt's figure appeared in my sight again, but this time not in my nightmares. She stood there, in the aisle, in her old uniform, a bright smile on her lips, but her eyes were empty. Like a blurred reflection, she just stood there, not saying a word. I felt as if time had stopped, everything around me suddenly became quiet. There was only the sound of my heart pounding in my ears and my own panting breathing. I wanted to run, but my body was numb. Every step I tried to take, a part of me felt pulled back, forced to face something I couldn't understand. Suddenly, the loudspeaker sounded again, reminding passengers about the flight status and asking everyone to sit back. Those words broke out like an explosion in the quiet space, bringing me back to the present, but the image of my aunt was still haunting, lingering in the corner of my eyes. I tried to breathe evenly, tried to return to reality, but everything around me seemed to be suffocating my every breath. The musty smell, the stench of the plane, the feeling like I was sitting in a quiet space where everything was cracked, drifting through an indeterminate reality. This environment, although bright and modern, made me feel as if I was in an endlessly repeating nightmare. Every time the light dimmed or there was a slight hiss in the cabin, my heart jumped in fear. Even though I knew this was probably just my extreme anxiety, the feeling of being surrounded by something invisible and uncontrollable didn't leave me. Now, I'm no longer just afraid of flying. I'm afraid the memories are slowly eating away at my mind, making me doubt the boundary between reality and what I imagine. She was always somewhere, waiting, watching, and I didn't know if I was being hunted by something inexplicable. As the last light of day fades, the narrator clearly senses that no place can truly be a safe place. Even though they moved away, leaving behind their old apartment with its flashing lights, static sounds, and ghostly figures, their aunt's presence still followed them. Like a ghost, she still haunts not only their dreams but also every waking moment, reminding them that death and loss always exist alongside life. One day, while on the next flight, the plane shook violently again, and the safety lights flashed. The narrator knows that no matter how they escape, they will still have to face that presence, just like their aunt once protected, but at the same time controlled them from an incomprehensible place. She was still standing there, right next to her, her eyes shining, smiling with a mystery that no one could explain. For a moment, the narrator wonders if the aunt is a protective force, or simply a spirit unable to let go of the material world, drawing them into a never-ending vortex. Ultimately, the story is not about finding answers to strange phenomena, but about accepting the presence of the incomprehensible. And as the planes continued to fly through the sky, as the nights continued to come with strange dreams, the narrator understood that her aunt's haunting never truly left. It's a never-ending journey where they learn to live with the unexplainable.